Hospital porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order. Welcome to Panwo TV. And welcome to this, my third reply to Steve Mumbling about the Apollo moon landings. Now what you'll find is this is quite common. Okay, this particular subject, more than any other, generates dialogue. It generates discourse. You get like replies to somebody, then there's a reply back, and there's a reply back. And for example, on the Hapanwo forum, which is the official forum of Hapanwo, you'll find that the longest threads are those that discuss this subject, and they just go on and on and on, back and forth, back and forth. They get very repetitive. Sometimes you get the same comments. No agreement is reached at the end. I've never seen that happen. There's never a consensus agreed on. So that's not going to happen this time either. So anyway, for this third particular reply to Steve Mumbling is this third particular reply to Steve Mumbling is based on a video, or a series of videos actually, that Steve has made, which is a response to not the videos I made in response to him, but to a video we made basically as a standalone one, which was a joint effort between me and Neil Geddes Ward, which was Apollo Detectives. And when I actually knew that this would really trigger Steve Mumbling. I really did. I knew, and in fact excuse me, my cough's still there. And I knew. I even posted a little comment under one of his videos saying, "Steve, you're going to love on this next upload," because I knew he would, and indeed he did. It's really, it just seemed to have galvanised him, and he's put an awful lot of effort into trying to detract the points made by me, Marcus, and the other guests in that particular video. He calls his video Apollo Defectives, which is awfully droll. I think he thinks that's witty. Well, ha bloody ha, Steve. Now, what I did was, because as soon as I saw him uploading all these videos, I thought, right, I'm going to watch these videos, and I'm going to post a reply to every single point he makes in them. And I watched the videos now, and I've worked out, and I've realised I can't actually respond to every single point right now in this particular video. I can't respond to all the points he makes. I don't have the amount of information. I don't have an answer at this particular point. But that's not a problem. That doesn't mean I'll never have an answer. It doesn't mean there is no answer, and that somebody else might not be able to provide an answer to Steve. It doesn't mean Steve is necessarily correct and he's proved all his detractors wrong, although he will claim that, of course. So I'm not going to address every point Steve makes in that video, which is fine, because Steve doesn't address every point that we made in the Apollo Detectives video. In fact, he doesn't even address the majority of them. So no response has to be, or no review or critique has to be complete. It doesn't have to be. That's not necessary. Anyway, well, I'll start with Apollo Defectives Part 1, which is it's just called the Apollo Defectives. It's the first video he uploaded, so we'll begin. We'll let him begin. He puts up a copyright disclaimer notice, which is fair enough. I mean, I'll probably do the same. Although he should know, I'm not the petty-minded kind of. I'm not the petty-minded kind of person who would like false flag his videos. I don't do that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing I rile against an awful lot when it happens to other people. So that if the light changes on my face as a result of this, it's because I've got the player open, and the player actually, what I'll do is I'll minimise it so you get a bit more light. But basically, the monitor screen is actually providing some of the lighting for this particular video.
Latest offer in from Ben with regard to fake moon landings. All in his head, of course, and in the heads of these other conspirators he's got here.
It's not all in our heads. It's not all in our heads. And just saying conspirators immediately sets the scene. It immediately sets the whole scene for what's happened. And the thing is, he justifies this because Marcus at one point calls Elon Musk a cowboy. Not that being a cowboy is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you can be a really, really cool cowboy. You could even be a gay cowboy, like the ones in Brokeback Mountain. It's just, or again, it's a nickname for Americans in some way. But what Steve does is he takes this and he uses it as a kind of whataboutery situation for his own rhetoric. And I should point out that the tone of this particular video is very, very different. Let me just carry on with the intro and I'll just tell you what I mean.
Marcus Allen, famous moonfake spruiker.
I don't know what does spruiker or spruiking mean. honestly, Steve's the only person who uses the word spruiking, and to spruik or whatever. S-P-R-U-I-K. It sounds like something Dutch or Afrikaans or something. He's literally the only person I've ever heard use that word. And I spent a month and a half in Australia. I never heard any other Australians use that word. So, a bit of a strange term. Anyway, let them carry on. I guess I know what it means. It seems to mean someone who speaks publicly about something that is something that Steve Mumbling considers nonsensical.
Now, I think this is quite an interesting comment because Marcus Allen, let's just listen to a little bit of what Marcus Allen has to say.
No.
Okay, now that's Steve basically introducing the first video. What you'll hear, I won't actually. I don't think I'll go to every single example because basically it takes about two-thirds of the entire series of videos. But Steve's tone in this particular video is very, very different. I must say that I've always sort of not had a problem with Steve's manner. I know that he's Australian. I know he's British by birth, and you can hear it in his accent. He has a kind of not a transatlantic, what is it? Trans Britain to Australia type accent. But he's always had that sort of that roughness about him. But I've always not had a problem with it. I've always found it an acceptable level. However, in this video, I think it crosses the line into excessive rhetoric. There's a massive amount of rhetoric in this. There's a huge amount of ad hominem comments, a lot of personal attacks, far less than he normally does in his videos. Far more than he does. Now, these videos are very long. I mean, you put all these videos he's made together, they come to about 3.5 hours. But there's far less information you'd expect in 3.5 hours of video because he's always chuckling and saying and making sarcastic comments like that. I mean, over two-thirds of the video is him just, having a laugh and going, I don't know why I'm wasting my time with this. Well, he obviously is wasting. He says he's wasting his time. He several times he comments that he's wasting his time with us. Yet he goes on to make more videos, Steve. So it's like you say you're wasting your time, etc. But then you're the one who chooses to make these videos. You're the one who chooses to watch ours and make responses. So you don't think you're wasting your time, do you? But he's always going. It's pretty clear that these people don't know what they're talking about. Let me see this. We are dealing with people who have no knowledge of this particular subject. That happens over and over again, and it's tiresome. Actually, I was sitting there watching this video saying, "Get on with it, Steve. Come on, get to the point." And he repeats himself several times. He makes the same comments. I mean, a couple of times he includes witty things in it, and he makes a joke, and it's quite funny. And there's a bit of comedy in the video, but it's rare, few and far between. I don't mind, sort of witticisms and comedy to take the piss out of people like me. That's fine. I don't mind it. Look. I'm an ex-hospital porter. I'm a tough old bird. I can take this sort of thing. But when it's repetitive, it goes on and on about it, and sometimes it's excessive. It's over the top. For example, I think several times he crosses the line. More than once he calls Scott Henderson the chef. Now, Scott actually makes a point that he's actually a chef. He actually says at the beginning of the video that he's a chef, and he says that he's sharp. His mind is sharper than his knives. He uses this metaphor to describe what he does. I think it's his mind is sharper than his knives. But either way, he's using a metaphor to explain how he is proud of what he's done, and he is confident in what he's actually revealed. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then when Steve goes on to call him the chef continuously, or at least 3 times he refers to Scott as the chef, in a sense that's trying to demeaning. It's like saying it's in a sense it's a label to demean that person, to make them appear less qualified than they are, as if, well, he's obviously doesn't know what he's talking about because he bakes souffles and whips cream all day, as if that's an ad hominem. It's a pure ad hominem. It's this, rather than addressing the points Scott makes, and Steve actually only addresses a handful of the points that any of us make in this video that I produced with Neil, which is more than 4 hours long. And as I said, he's made a video for 3.5 hours. He spends most of it chuckling and making sarcastic comments and repeating himself over and over. In several of the videos, he brings up the same points several times. I mean, this could be put down to poor memory because he may not have remembered what he did in his previous videos. But it doesn't mean that I shouldn't make a point of that. I mean, ad hominem is it is a fallacy. It's probably the most common and widely used and accepted fallacy in the world. And you hear it everywhere. In fact, every time these days you get into a disagreement with someone, you'll be hit with an ad hominem. I was talking about it the other day. I was debating with a Remainer about the EU, and they said to me, "Oh, but you've never run a small business, Ben." "I have. I've run a business." "So, Ben, you're not qualified to comment." You see, "I am." Every single Leave voter is in some way hit with an ad hominem. Now, an ad hominem is like going up to Albert Einstein and saying, "Look, mate, you're wrong about the E equals MC squared things. You have to be. I know you're wrong because you've got a stupid haircut." You see what I mean? Now, one thing, the most disturbing element which Steve actually brings up, and I think he should be deeply ashamed for this, is deeply ashamed of himself for this, is when Colin Sugrin comes on, who's the other guest we invite on, and brings up a number of points, and Steve says, "Oh, I really like to feed him into a wood chipper. I feel this urge to feed him into a wood chipper. Feet first so I can listen to him screaming as he goes in." And I mean, that's obviously, I know, Steve, you're joking. I know that you're not inciting violence here. You're not doing anything illegal. I know that. But it's a pretty awful thing to say. It's a pretty nasty thing to say. A man you haven't met, you haven't even seen. I've only listened to his voice. I've never met him. He's disagreeing with you. Explain to him why he's wrong. And you put your point, several points across in rebuttal to his. But the moment you start then making these violent hyperbole against Colin, what are we to make of that? It doesn't make you sound very confident, does it? Anyway, I'm going to go forward now. I'll maximise this briefly, just so it's going to go dark, because I need to move forward to the correct timestamp. And Marcus, Steve is going to mention something about Marcus.
Giving a presentation on Ben's Dreaming Saucers conference, if that's the right word, where he says that von Braun and co. were the German scientists that got America to the moon. So, what I would like to ask you, Mr. Allen, is, see, he doesn't address these problems. He doesn't address these things. He just brush over it. You know, don't attack me, attack what I'm saying. Okay, I'm attacking what you're saying. You said von Braun and co. were the German scientists that got America to the moon. Now, if America never went to the moon, how can von Braun and co. possibly be the German scientists that got America to the moon?
This is something that Steve thinks is some massive contradiction and some massive kind of piece of hypocrisy on Marcus's part. He's picked this out in an attempt to discredit Marcus by saying, "Look, you say that Germans got US to the moon, and you say people didn't go to the moon. So why is that? What's that all about?" Now, the thing about it is, that is really nitpicking. Now, I'll say this again. I actually did address this before, and Steve's asked me to direct viewers to where I address his points before if he repeats himself. And I addressed it in a second reply to him on the moon landings, where I respond to his criticism of Marcus's talk at Dreaming Saucers. And it was a conference, and he says, "A conference, if that's what you call it. Well, what else would you call it?" Yes, so that's where I did it. Now, Marcus, just because Marcus is, in a sense, Marcus is, he's avoiding having to constantly repeat what essentially is a truism when you look at his entire hypothesis, which is Germans got the US, would have got the US to the moon if Americans had gone. Right? If he keeps having to repeat that over and over again, it's a bit of a verbal shackle. And to get around that, you just make certain statements in which you think, you assume people already know what you mean. You assume the viewer, the audience, already has some knowledge of the point you are making outside of the actual words. So in other words, they can pick up the subtext of what you're saying. when he says, "Oh, Germans apparently got US to the moon," what Marcus is saying is that there was a massive German involvement in the Apollo program, and this is true. The rocket designs were based on missiles that were developed in Nazi Germany, and with the help of other people like Jack Parsons. So I could do an entire video on Jack Parsons, who was an American, not a German. But this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. And so Marcus is, in a sense, just opening up an element of the story. It's not a contradiction. And now, after that happens, I'll go forward. The same can't be said for something else, and I will give Steve his due. He brings up something similar, and you have to give a different answer, and I'm going to have to give a different answer to it. Okay, so I'll just go forward to the right timestamp.
My channel, Ben's channel, Bob, historical account. But apparently Marcus Allen debated the British Interplanetary Society, and
yes, he did. Marcus is very brave. He's absolutely fearless.
Apparently he told them that he did not doubt the historical account.
Right. This to give you a bit of background. This is where Marcus actually attended the British Interplanetary Society in London, and he did a lecture in front of what must be the most hostile audience of all. And in fact, if you listen to the Hapanwo show I did with Marcus, which is program, bear with me, program 306, if you go to that particular podcast, you will see where Marcus and I discuss it in detail. Marcus and I go through this in detail, and I'm just going to make a little quick note to remind myself of something. We go through this in detail about Marcus's trip to the British Interplanetary Society, which was remarkably successful. I mean, there was a lot of things that went wrong with it. His opponent behaved in a really bad way, and used a very, very nasty ad hominem against Marcus, which again, we come back to the ad hominem. It's like I say, it's almost the ad hominem is the normal way to do business today. So when this guy, basically he tried to equate people who, like Marcus and myself, who question Apollo, with Holocaust deniers, which is an incredibly vicious thing to do. And now what happened was Steve then went and read Mary Bennett's review of Marcus's experience at the British Interplanetary Society on the Orlis website, orlis.com. Very good website, please do go there. And at one point Mary actually writes this. In fact, Marcus Allen's personal view is that we did send men to the moon, but that the photographic record of Apollo is full of unexplained problems. A different matter entirely. I think this is what Steve is referring to. In fact, he puts a reference to that particular article. I assume that's what he means. And let me go on a little bit more, actually. Hang on a second.
He only doubted the photographic record, not the actual event itself. He believed they went. He thought there was problems with the photographs. Now, apparently that's what he told the British Interplanetary Society. Now, he dodges this question every time.
Does he? I'm not sure it's actually been asked before. Steve goes on.
I've asked Ben to ask him. I've written comments saying, what is your stance on this? Is it true or false that Marcus Allen told the British Interplanetary Society that he doesn't doubt the historical accuracy of the event? He doesn't doubt that Armstrong and Aldrin stepped on the moon, July the 20th, 1969. He only doubts the photographic record. Perhaps you could clear that up for us, Mr. Allen. That's not attacking you. That's just
Okay. Now, Steve first complains that we haven't replied to him. Well, this is the reply. It's he asks these questions, he puts these comments in, and I think he expects an immediate response, which he's not necessarily going to get, especially when I have books to write and things like that. I suppose it's a fair question when you read that sentence that I read out. But put it into the context of the rest of the material on Orlis.com, and in the book Dark Moon, it's on my shelf over there. You may just be able to see it on the corner there. I'm not going to get it out, but you may just be able to see the book Dark Moon, Apollo and the Whistleblowers, which I've got on my shelf, which I've read. It's an excellent book. It's one of the things that got me into this subject. Now, in that book and on the Orlist.com website, the authors, that's Mary Bennett and David Percy, refer to something called the surrogate Apollo program, and they actually asked the question, and this actually comes up on the John Ronson program, which Marcus was on, which is For the Love of Moon Landings, which is, and indeed Mary's on there as well, and David, and a couple of other people. Matthew Williams is even on there, Andy Thomas, and well, I'm sure. Well, I wasn't into this, but if they'd asked me to go on there, I don't know what I'd have done. But anyway, they talk about the surrogate moon program. Now, what the question is, did other unnamed astronauts sacrifice their lives to do what the named astronauts actually did? This has come up several times. The idea that there is a parallel space program which is done in secret, and that very often there are disasters which occur and astronauts die. Some even go on suicide missions where they know they're going to die and receive no acclaim for it at all. And the only and then there's named astronauts which get all the publicity, which are the fake ones. Now, it's not just the United States that Bennett and Percy actually talk about in this situation. In fact, most of the examples they come up with are actually Russian. The Soviet Space Agency actually did. I know there was more than one space agency, but the various people within the space program in the Soviet Union launched several missions that were never publicised afterwards, basically because the astronauts died. And there were a couple were suicide missions. There were one or two were actually suicide missions where the astronauts knew they weren't going to come back. And indeed, it's a very, very interesting subject, and I don't have time to go into detail here. But the surrogate moon program is discussed in detail in the book, which I do recommend. There was actually a lunar mission that went to the moon, and that what was presented to the world was a fake equivalent to that. The astronauts who went to the moon actually lost their lives, either through an accident, knowing it would be very dangerous, or even maybe as a kind of suicide mission, a kamikaze mission. That's now what I believe Mary is referring to is that Marcus Allen's personal view, and I think probably Marcus goes along with this. Although to be honest, to be fair to you, Steve, it's a valid question that perhaps Marcus could clarify what he thinks on that. But I'm absolutely certain that Marcus is not being a hypocrite here. He's not being two-faced. He doesn't mean that the Apollo missions were real and they faked the photos afterwards, possibly because there was a bit of dust in the camera or something. We'll come on to the dust later. But that's what some people, even Brian O'Leary, suggested that this was a possibility. That's not what Marcus is saying. I'm absolutely certain. I think that's what you're implying he's saying. And I'm absolutely certain he's not. The surrogate space program described by Bennett and Percy is different from the secret space program, which people like Andrew Johnson talk about. Well, that's something entirely different. Although Marcus may well have meant that as well. I don't know. Anyway, this is the reply you say you're not getting, because you don't have the patience to wait for us to do it. You know, with all the other comments that come in which I have to make these long comment videos about. Okay, so we'll move forward now to another point. I'm just going to maximise to expand and all that. So where are we now? Okay, go back a bit. There are some things I won't be able to show you, right? There are pictures. So do go watch Steve's video, because you will see some things in picture. I will show you a few pictures later of some things, but right now I can't, because I'd have to take the camera off, turn it around, point it at the monitor the way Steve does, and I never really get it reframed properly, and it's too much of a bother. Now, if you go to 1401, timestamp 1401, in the Apollo Defectives, the first Apollo Defectives film that Steve has uploaded, you'll see a point where he discusses the interior of the lunar module, and this is what he says.
Having seen the rest of this presentation, I would say that it's more likely to be rubbish than not. He doesn't offer any evidence to back up this statement.
Here we go.
LEM with the
go back a bit.
Spacesuit. Funny. This is where they're talking about you can't get to back up this statement. Okay, next. This is quite funny. This is where they're talking about you can't get in and out of the LEM with the spacesuits and all this sort of stuff. And there's a new design for this lunar rover, or Mars rover, where the astronaut sort of steps in the suit from inside of the vehicle.
Now, if you go to that timestamp, 1401, on the Apollo Defectives, the first Apollo Defectives film, what you will see is a very, very interesting craft. It's a proposed design for a lunar rover or a Martian rover, where there's people in space with their space. The spacesuits are essentially not brought into the craft. They are kept outside. They're attached to like a very special kind of hatchway or airlock, which is on the exterior of the craft, and they're attached via a large, basically a segment of the back of the spacesuit, which essentially mates with the airlock, and then the airlock opens, and you have a seal. You have an airtight seal between the suit and the interior of the craft, which allows the astronaut to actually climb into the spacesuit from inside the craft through this hatch. And it's very interesting. You get two of them side by side, the 2D spacesuits, and the astronaut just crawls out of his spacesuit, like you would if you were crawling out of a big boiler suit or something. You unzip it and just crawl out into the spacecraft. It means that the actual exterior spacesuits never has to come in. You don't have the problem of dust gathering inside. And that's something I'm going to come on to again in a minute. But Marcus, sorry, I'll just let him carry on, just make sure I haven't misunderstood him. So I'll let him carry on for a bit.
Inside of the vehicle. Steps into the suit, and they butt the suit back up here. Of course, you've still got to worry about pressure sealing all this. But the bit that I thought was funny was this comment.
And we're rethinking their whole approach to possibly, if they did go to the moon officially.
Hang on, I'll stop it for a moment. Just to clarify, the point Steve has made is that we during the discussion we had in Apollo Defectives, I'm doing it now. The Apollo Detectives. That's me and Neil's film. We discussed the way that the astronauts actually put their spacesuits on, and this is a big concern actually, because you actually see the spacesuits, the lunar spacesuits. They're very different to the ones you have on the International Space Station. I mean, you have like a pressure suit which you put on, which has a high pressure inside, which protects the body from the vacuum of space. You also have cooling, and you have heating elements to prevent you getting too cold and too hot in the suit. You also have some kind of armament against micrometeorite impacts up to a certain point. You have a helmet on them, which you have a seal around them like that. But you also, what you have on the lunar suit is you have these big boots, because you have to walk. These are the only spacesuits which have ever been designed to walk anywhere, because all the others are designed to be used in low Earth orbit, where you float. You just float in zero gravity, or microgravity. Now, if you see people getting these suits on, even the modern ones on the ISS, you can't do it alone. You have to have someone to help you. And indeed, before the Apollo missions actually launched, there's actually an episode of a TV show called I think it's Horizon. I think a very old science TV show, where you see one of the presenters, a guy called James Burke, who's actually he's actually a really good pop scientist TV presenter. You know, in the days where these people were actually dignified and informative, and they weren't just flash Harrys who talk crap like Professor Brian Cox. You know, it's. Oh, I'm going off on a tangent. No, I'm not going to rant about TV now. But the point is, James Burke was a really good guy. He did this brilliant series called "The Day the Earth Changed" and things like that. And you see him. He actually walks out into the studio wearing an Apollo moon suit. And he's got like a radio, and you can hear his voice because he has like a radio link. But he's in this sealed moon suit. And he takes it off live on camera. You can get this on YouTube. Go search for it. But he needs two guys to actually help him to unseal the suit, depressurise it, and then pull it off him. Get the helmet off. You have to screw the helmet off, because it's like an airtight seal around your neck and a collar. And pull that off. Then there's the PLIS, of course, the portable life support system, and other kinds of things like that. And talking about the PLIS, Scott, I think, brings that up in the film, and Steve never responds to it. That's one of the things that Steve doesn't respond to in his review. Now, of course, you could say, well, they did have help. You know, Aldrin and Armstrong in Apollo 11, and the other two astronauts, because there were supposedly two astronauts on every single moon mission who went down with the rest of the astronauts. They helped each other. The thing about it is, when I see this thing being demonstrated, there's always two helpers, and indeed on the ISS there's always more than one person apart from the person doing the extravehicular activity helping sort out the suit. And there's also a lot of room. I mean, where it's done to James Burke, you see like there's a big room around him, a laboratory, so there's plenty of room to move around. Now, Jim Collier pointed this out very well. The late great Jim Collier, I believe it is late great, along with all the others who passed away, such as Ralph Renee, the great Bill Casing. You know, it's really sad that these guys are gone. He points out the fact that how did you, because he goes to visit the mock-up of the LEM in a museum, or a LEM that was never used and put in a museum. He goes inside and it's pretty clear there's very little room to move around. Yet they had to put the suits on. They had to take them off afterwards as well. In the case of the multiple EVA missions later on in the Apollo program, 17 especially, because they became longer and more elaborate towards the end, you had more than one EVA with all the dust around, which he's going to come on to later. So that's the point he was making. Now Steve responds by showing a proposed design for a future ground vehicle for the Moon or Mars, with a totally different design concept. So Steve, you are actually not helping. You're not really making a rebuttal to the point that we made about the lunar module and putting the spacesuit on. Okay, I'm going to move on now. I think that's the end of that particular segment.
If they did go to the moon officially, well, I think if you ask NASA, the American government and the scientific community, I think you'll find that they have officially been to the moon.
Yeah, I know. That's another bit. But yeah, of course they've officially been to the moon, but well, officially, you know, Santa Claus exists. Or so. Yeah, there's all kinds of things that are officially, which might not be true. Officially, 9/11 was done by Bin Laden. Officially, Roswell was Project Mogul. I'll be replying to Steve on Roswell in a little while. But anyway, I'm going to move forward to another timestamp, which is 1521. So I've got some notes here. Let's go forward to that. So I'll go back.
Here we have Marcus Allen talking about live broadcasts from the moon.
What was this?
We'll see it. We were all watching it, weren't we? On the front, crouched in front of our TVs at 3 o'clock in the morning. My mum and dad were. They told
Yes, I was.
me all about it. So that would be very, very.
Well, yes, in fact, you mentioned a very interesting phrase there: live TV.
Okay, right. Now this is I won't be able to go into. I won't go into this entire segment. But Marcus, as you remember, Marcus and I and the others, we discussed the problems with the communication system between the moon and the Earth for Apollo 11. Now, those of you who actually watched the TV broadcast, and unfortunately you can't watch the entire TV broadcast now because they were never actually kept. Now, the TV studios actually did not keep the recordings of the news clips, because I mean, there was a quite unique event for television in those days. The television went broadcasting all through the night, depending where you were living in the world. Of course, for those living in Western Europe, like my parents, it was all through the night, and you can't see that famous TV footage, unfortunately, because it was not kept. No one knows of any complete recording. There are a few clips from various news networks that were covering it. But basically, they record the entire thing they have people like Patrick Moore and other experts and TV experts. And it's this usual news special. And it was pretty much, there was a real party atmosphere at the time in Britain. I mean, my mum and dad basically, they got the gin and tonic out. You know, they invited their friends around. They were sitting around the TV, having a few drinks, and just watching this amazing event. It's before my time, but I mean, it'd be nice to actually witness this myself, because if I'd been in the right frame of mind and I wouldn't have spoiled it by telling everyone it was fake all the time, because of course no one thought it was fake at the time. It was a couple of years later that Bill Casing came out and said it was fake. But the point is that how was this possible? How did they manage this live link up? And I mean, there were several things that could solve that. For example, if the original tapes that NASA actually recorded through their own connection, and we know that the National Security Agency was involved in this as well, and a lot of it was filtered through them. But there were tapes recorded, videotapes recorded at NASA, big chunky things, because they had big, videotape in those days was about that thick, that were filmed, that were taken, and this was shown to the media. Some of it had to be, the media actually had to film directly off it with the camera. They had to film it off a screen. That's one of the reasons the Apollo 11 TV footage is actually such poor quality. Now, Steve points out a couple of things. I mean, as if he's telling us stuff we don't already know. But even though I myself referred to this myself in my own previous broadcast, which is they did employ the services of several radio telescopes, Honeysuckle Creek, Parkes radio telescope, and it's particularly sort of like I suppose good for him. It's particularly proud for him because these were in Australia. Because of where Australia was geographically, and it was in the best position to actually pick these things up, and because they had this big 300-metre antenna at the Parkes Observatory, they actually employed this radio telescope to pick up the live TV broadcast allegedly from the moon. And indeed, there's a really good film been made out about it called The Dish. It was a film that was released in 2000. I was lucky enough actually to be in Australia when that film was released, so I actually went to see it in a cinema in Australia, and I saw it before everyone else. It's quite an amusing film with Sam Neill, comedy sort of thing. Like lots of Australian culture, it's very light-hearted. But Steve then goes on to dispute what Marcus said about the power that was available to transmit, and whether that would be able you would actually be able to get a live TV signal. And he goes for a large proportion of the first Apollo Defectives film is him contradicting Marcus on this. Now, this is one of the things I don't have an answer for right now. I can't actually take all the points that Steve made and actually to dispute this. But I do want to bring up a couple of points. I do want to bring up though is that the videotapes from NASA, the original videotapes from where this feed eventually ended up, would be vital evidence. And if they were examined, possibly this matter could be cleared up. The problem is NASA have lost those tapes. It's incredible. They lost some of the most important historical documents in the history of televisual art and news. They lost them. I mean, maybe they slipped down behind a radiator. Oh no, I left it on the bus. They come up with all kinds of excuses and they just can't find them. I mean, didn't no one put them somewhere safe? Did no one label them and say, these are the original Apollo 11 videotapes? I mean, I say lost. I mean, when we think of video today, we think of like little slivers, little SD cards and things like that. You can fall through a hole in your pocket. But as I said, videotape was that thick in those days. These video cassettes were the size of oil drums. No, they didn't fall behind a radiator. There's no. They're not easy to lose. I can't actually answer. Like I said, that's one thing I'd like to say to Steve. Why is this evidence not available to clear up this matter? And as for the rest of it, I don't have an answer for you right now. This doesn't mean you're right and I'm wrong, and Marcus is wrong. It just means the information is not available to us right now. However, I noticed that Hunchbacked has uploaded a few videos on this subject, so I'll have a look through those. I mean, it'll take a while to get through them, but viewers can actually go there right now if they like. Go to Hunchback's channel. It's HUNCHBACKED. That's the YouTuber you want to talk about, and he has a number of fascinating videos on all kinds of things to do with the Apollo missions, especially the same kind of speciality as Steve. That is the electronic side of things. Hunchback also knows an awful lot about this sort of thing, and I noticed he has done a few videos about the antenna, about how the antenna, and about how powerful it was, and about how much antenna gain, and things like that, and the inverse square law, and all the other things that Steve is ridiculing. It's all. I noticed Hunchback has covered these things. I haven't watched the videos yet because I wanted to get this video done first. But viewers can go and look at that now. The answer might be there right now, and you may be able to discover it before I do. We're going to forward now a little bit to another point, a long way, because Steve actually spends a good third of this particular video going on, addressing this particular point, for which I have no answer right now. Here we go.
All the crackling noise is actually on Ben's original video.
All right, he's talking. There was some poor sound quality on that. I'm sorry, I don't know why that was. It was something to do with my Skype connection. Carry on.
But here again, these people he's got on his panel are demonstrating their complete ignorance with regard.
Comments like those make up the bulk of Steve's recent uploads on this subject. Now, how many times do you have to say that people are ignorant and say, you know, Albert Einstein's got a stupid haircut? It doesn't matter how many times you say these things. These ad hominems never, ever fill the hole of which could be filled by a logical rebuttal, a rational argument. And that's something, you're not the only person who doesn't understand this, Steve. A lot of people do. In fact, like I say, it's the normal way to do business in this world today. And you're doing business the usual way.
The way these things work. Okay, let's have another giggle.
The craft on the way to the moon, for example, Jodrell Bank telescope, claims to have followed the command module all the way to the moon and the lunar surface.
So that's my Skype connection.
We're decepting the radio transmission.
Go forward a bit. So I went forward a bit because you can't really hear what I'm saying there. But basically, what I'm saying is that in one of the debunking programs on TV, it was called Stranger Than Fiction, Fake Moon Landings or something like that. You interview a scientist actually at the Jodrell Bank radio telescope. Now this is an interesting thing. The Jodrell Bank radio telescope is a huge, very sensitive array of astronomical instruments. It's actually some of the most sensitive astronomical instruments and most powerful astronomical instruments in the world. It's a big, massive complex in Cheshire, and it's come up in it's come up in my BBC talk because I mentioned Professor Brian Cox and Threppleton Hornsby. If you remember, if you ever watched my BBC talk or my Newcastle, my most latest Truth Seekers North East one. A scientist there actually at Jodrell Bank thought it would be amusing to track the command module, lunar module spacecraft, the Apollo 11 spacecraft, to the moon. And he claims to have done so. He claims to have tracked this craft to the moon, and then and even monitored the lunar module as it landed, and kind of like spy in real time at this. Now, well, firstly, I mean, the point I should make is they believe they were tracking the lunar module and command module. It's more accurate to say they were tracking something that was transmitting signals which you would get from the NASA command and lunar module, the Apollo spacecraft. It's more accurate to say that. It doesn't mean it actually was an Apollo spacecraft. That's the point. Now, I'm going to just play a little bit of what Steve says about this, and he has a very long and detailed response to this.
And the altitude, all this sort of stuff is being given to the astronauts. So it's just like landing a plane. They're landing the lunar module, and that link is going back to Earth, and back on Earth they're seeing all that information. They know it's 20 feet off the ground, or they know it's 200 feet off the ground, and they know. But people trying to find them. As soon as you turn a radio transmitter on, someone can find you. I don't know why I'm wasting my time on it. The comments are beyond being able to track that.
So I'm trying to find little clips where Steve actually makes points in between the sort of ridiculing and the general scoffing that he does. What he says is basically this would not be a problem because the Apollo, it would be very, very easy to locate the Apollo spacecraft and very, very easy to follow it because it's constantly beaming back a signal. It's beaming back a tracer signal and telemetry continuously back to NASA. And that anyone with the right equipment could actually home in on that. Again, I don't have an answer. I don't actually have an answer to that specifically at this point, at this actual point. But this doesn't mean there is not one, and indeed maybe Hunchbacks has already covered it. So you can just check out Hunchback's channel. But the point I want to make is that whatever it is that was tracking, whether you could track it or not, whether Jodrell Bank could. I mean, Jodrell Bank can pick up pulsars in trillion light years away. So presumably that could be a reason why it could pick up something that resembled an Apollo spacecraft in the vicinity of the moon or heading to the moon. Whether it was that or not is another matter. It could be some kind of unmanned radio relay, which is actually simply broadcasting with something that is being transmitted to it from the ground, which is part of the plot to fake the moon landings. Or it could even be a TR-3B or some other kind of anti-gravity vehicle from the secret space program that again is disguising itself. It's got this radiological camouflage, which makes it look like an Apollo spacecraft. Its movements and its emissions resemble exactly what an Apollo spacecraft would. Because I'm sure the people who are behind this would have actually considered this possibility. That is a possibility. Remember, it's people say out of sight, out of mind. Maybe there's an element to that. Maybe you could launch a real Apollo rocket into low Earth orbit, and that's where the astronauts could hang out. But they would need to make it look. They knew there were a lot of people watching the skies, and there were some people with the ability to pick up what should be there, and maybe even fooling the people back at Mission Control, because not everyone in Mission Control needed to know it wasn't real. But so in a sense, I'm making a separate point to the one Steve is, but maybe the point Steve is not correct either. Maybe there's an answer to that. I don't have it right now. Doesn't necessarily mean Steve is definitely right. Okay, we'll go forward a little bit now. I think that's about right. Let's have a look. Yeah, that's right. Here we go.
Bothered? Actually no, because there's going to be a watch. I'm going to put this in before the watch. There's a bit on the moon watch, and I might finish with that because I'm getting pretty weary of this. There are no...
No, you're not getting weary of it, Steve. You can't stop. You can't let it go, can you? You keep saying, oh, I don't know why I'm bothering. Oh, I can't keep doing this. But you do keep doing it. It's like these people who say, oh, your videos are awful. They're absolutely terrible. I get comments like that all the time. And my answer is, well, go watch somebody else's videos then. So this thought it was absolutely terrible. I watched every single moment of it. It's 2.5 hours long and I watched it all. Can't have been that terrible then, could it? Steve is one of these people. He really is.
Anomalies in any of their photographs. When they're talking about, Buzz Aldrin coming out of the back of the lunar module and he's lit. Just think.
Oh right. Oh no. Now this is the point. Now this is Steve only briefly touches on this. But like I said, the actual points that Marcus brings up about the Apollo 11 ladder photo are absolutely valid. Now Steve goes on to talk about the full moon and a snowy landscape. Hang on.
If you live in a country where in the winter you get good snow coverage on the ground. Now I haven't seen snow for decades because where I live in Australia we don't get snow. Even in the winter it doesn't get down to 0 degrees. So. But when I lived back in the UK, there'd be thick snow on the ground, okay? Just picture this. Thick snow on the ground, you're out in the country, there's no street lighting, but there's a full moon. Think how much light there is. Now that's not... that's light coming from the sun, it's reflecting off the moon's surface, and it's coming another 250,000 miles back to you, reflecting off the snow.
That's the entire disk of the moon. Like 7.5 million square miles of reflector coming back at you. the albedo of the moon is, I think it's 7.1 or something like that. The albedo, that is the percentage of electromagnetic radiation that was reflected back off the surface. So if it's about 7% of the sunlight, which is what you'd expect when you consider that the full moon can indeed illuminate a night. Nights without the full moon with a very thin moon are much darker than those with the moon. However, 7.1, if that's the correct figure, and it can be checked, is exactly the same as tarmac. Now, the point of the matter is, if you had 7.5 million square miles of tarmac and you put it up in the sky, and the sun was reflecting off it, yes, you'd be like a big spotlight, exactly like the full moon is. The moon's surface, the lunar surface, lighting up the night. But you cannot use that to suggest, for that reason, the ladder photo, therefore, it explains the lighting effects of the ladder photo, because it's just all this light coming back up here. Firstly, it's not all that light. It's not 7.5 million square miles of light coming back up here, reflecting off the lunar surface. If that was the case, then you'd see the same thing with tarmac. You can actually do this on tarmac. And it's interesting, actually, that the people like Mythbusters, and other various skeptics, people like Jay Windley did a program about this. In fact, I think it was Jay who was in the Stranger Than Fiction debunking program that I mentioned earlier, the documentary I mentioned earlier. What he actually tries to prove, Mythbusters did this too. They proved. I'm going to do what Steve does now. They proved that the moon landings were shot in natural sunlight. They're not in a studio lit by artificial lights, by recreating the lunar photos in a studio lit by artificial lights. I tell you, another researcher, Jarrell White, did actually try. He tried to recreate the ladder photo in natural sunlight. He's the only guy I know who's actually tried to actually to reproduce the ladder photo with the same kind of lighting effects that you actually see in nature. That is the sun shining down on something with an albedo of 7.1%, and he actually uses the road outside his house. He lives in Australia too. And he uses the road with the tarmac of the road. And you do not, I mean, what he does is, what you find, if you give it a really long exposure, you do actually, the reflected light from the tarmac actually does illuminate the ladder side of the LEM, but then it whites out the background. Alternatively, if you have a really slow exposure, you actually do pick up the background and in the sunlight, but then you have a silhouette for the actual subject. That is the near side of the LEM. And indeed, this is Marcus goes into this in great detail, and Steve does not address this. But even NVIDIA, the computer people who make the graphics card, they said they proved the moon landings were real because they did a mock-up, they did a CGI rendering of the original ladder photo, and they proved it was in natural sunlight. Well, Marcus and several other people have actually exposed this, including Jarrell White, have exposed this as complete lies. They fiddled with the figures, they massaged the data, they massaged the whole thing, and they published false data in order to say that. So I'd ask Steve to ponder on that. I'm going to go forward a little bit now to the next part. Now Steve makes a mistake here, which he later... he brings up the Apollo watch twice, and he makes a mistake here, which he later admits he later admits it to his credit in another video. But let's
Buzz Aldrin or Neil Armstrong, whichever one it was, stepped on the moon at a certain time. They quote a certain time for that activity, and it has to be faked because here's a view of the moon watch. And actually,
I'll skip the moon watch now because it comes back to it later. All right, so I don't want to repeat myself, even if Steve's going to. Okay, so now yeah. It's basically what he's saying is it's the watch. Now the watch, this is a Mega Moon watch. It's Mega Speedmaster was the watch that they wore on the moon. And yeah, I mean it's been the idea. I mean we did make a couple of mistakes in that, and I'll go into more detail. But I'm going to go forward now to the end of the video, which is where the end of this first video, where Steve goes back to his usual tricks. What is it? Let me just go back to my notes. 59:40. One moment. Yeah, that's close enough.
So, these guys are really not worth watching. To be honest with you,
we are though, aren't we, Steve?
This video as much of my time as I am because it really doesn't deserve it. And
well, we do deserve it.
Word for it, it really doesn't deserve any of your time either. It's just 4 hours of absolute rubbish. Okay, let's...
Well, you watched the whole thing, Steve, didn't you? You watched it from end to end. And by bringing it up like this, do you think you're encouraging or discouraging other people to go and see it? Thanks for the publicity, by the way.
Let's go on to the next clip. Okay, Marcus Allen's Freudian slips. Now, this is from Ben's Dreaming Sources presentation. This is actually from a video I did debunking it. But...
Right, yes. Okay, I'm going to stop right there because, in fact, I'm going to go forward to where he makes another point. But I'll just say a few words. Now, what he's basically saying, he gives a list of what he considers Marcus's Freudian slips. In other words, Marcus has said something which supposedly is a deep insight into his psychology and exposes him for the liar that he is, because he makes a few... either errors, or he just uses a few metaphors like he did with the Germans thing. He talks about Germans getting the US to the moon, which I've already addressed. Now Steve goes through these Freudian slips and he dedicates the last 5 minutes of this movie to just a list of these things, and he believes that this is evidence that Marcus deep down knows, deep down really, that he knows the moon landings were real, but he won't say so because he's out to make a few quid. In fact, I'm getting ahead of myself. He won't admit that it's not real. He won't admit that it's not real. He just can't face it. And then other people have said things like this to me. They've said, "Well, Ben, you really know the moon landings were taking place, but you won't say so because you won't admit it. You're lying. You're continuing this lie because you don't have the guts to face down your conspiracy theory buddies, this community you're in, and you don't want their scorn and ridicule, and you don't want them to turn against you. So you're continuing the lie just for convenience." And someone in my comments reply video, the one before this one, this actually comes up, and my answer is that that's completely false. So that's the ultimate in ad hominem, really, isn't it? That's the ultimate ad hominem, where you're attacking someone's character in that way. And this is a vicious attack against Marcus's character, and like people attack my character. Firstly, I mean, I personally, if I thought the moon landings were real, do you think I wouldn't say so? Have you seen what the trolls have said about me lately? The things I've been accused of, the things that I've been disparaged with from within, not from skeptics, from within the conspiratorial community. Have you seen what they've said? The things that have been said about me in the last 3 years make Royce Meyer's UFO Watchdog Hall of Shame page look like a fan club. But I have stood firm and I've resisted that. Do you really think that if I can resist that kind of abuse, that I couldn't resist people turning against me over a change of mind because of the Apollo missions? No. If I change my mind about something, I'll say it quite openly. Anyway, this is awful. Just listen to this.
Three very obvious Freudian slips made by Marcus Allen. I think it shows us all quite clearly. He knows very well that the moon landing happened, exactly as the history books tell us. Why he persists in spruiking all this fake moon landing nonsense. My guess is that gives him something to do, keeps him on the talk circuit, might make him a few quid.
Shame on you, Steve. That is unprofessional, and it is utterly immoral. And you did this before, and you're doing it again, and it's completely wrong. Okay, time to go on to the next video. They're not all that long, actually. Some of them are shorter. The first two are the long ones, and there's a series of shorter ones. So this is the second long one. It's the same length, just over an hour. And so we're going to go on to that. So let me just get it the right size. Because, like I said, I don't want this. I quite like the idea.
Well, I've had several requests, and some of them are.
Okay, now this is a video called Apollo Defectives 2: Morons on Patrol. And again, I'm sure, Steve, you patted yourself on the back, thinking you're some kind of clever, Tony Hancock style wag for coming up with that, don't you? You really do. Let's go on.
Actually anatomically possible, believe it or not. But that aside, someone said to me, "Go on, Steve, do a little bit more on this."
Oh, he does a lot more.
From Ben, the Apollo Defectives. I said it's painful stuff. It's difficult to watch.
I know.
All absolute drivel.
You're like a masochist.
Please go on, just please.
You must be some kind of BDSM guy in bed, Steve. You really must be. I bet you got whips and chains and all the 50 Shades of Grey stuff in your cupboard, haven't you? I bet your missus dresses. I bet she puts on the old lingerie and leather boots. She's stamping on your nutsack all night long, I bet, doesn't she? I bet you are. I mean, because you are. I mean, you are a masochist. If you really think this is that bad, if you really think it's that awful, and it's painful, as you say, painful, you cannot let it go, though, can you? You have to keep addressing it, which means you are a glutton for punishment. You like it. Well, I'm just providing a service. I'm like the what is it? The dominatrix. I'm not even charging you any money, and I know those ladies do charge money, and I'm not charging you a penny. So you should just say thank you.
I'll have a look. Okay, I'll have a look, and I'll do a little bit more on this.
He does a lot more
nonsense. So here's part 2 of the Apollo defectives. Now, I think what we'll start with is the chef.
The chef is Scott Henderson. This is one of about 3 or 4 times he actually calls Scott the chef. It's like, what's your job, Steve? Should I call you that and say because this is your job, you don't know what you're talking about? This is another Einstein's bad haircut comment.
And a couple of his pictures. Now, he shows a picture of a... actually, I'll show you the pictures. What I'll probably do is have a quick look on the video and then go to the actual NASA photographs, rather than go to his Orlis site, because he might start screaming copyright, you know. And the other thing too with the Orlis site, don't go there, please. Don't go there. That site would insult the intelligence of a cheese and pickle sandwich. Just don't bother with it. So
you see now, Steve is actually, first thing, it's not Scott's website. Scott contributes. The website is actually, I think it's Mary and David's. They're the publishers of that's the publishers of the book Dark Moon. And firstly, he's telling people not to look at Orlis.com. So he's basically saying don't look at the actual argument counter to my claim, because Steve is making a claim here too. When you use it, these things are like Newton's third law, equal and opposite. When you say this is wrong, this is not true, people really went to the moon, you're making a claim. As I've said in my Skeptics video. Now I'll put a link to the Skeptics video actually in the description box. You are making a claim when you say these things. You say you're not, but you are. Skeptics think they're not, they are. And Steve is actually telling people not to go to the Orlis website. Don't look at the things that disagree with me. Don't make your own mind up. Which is pretty bad, because I've actually, not only have I would never say that myself, but I also actually encourage people to watch Steve's videos. I'm going to put a link in the description box of this video to Steve's upload that I'm talking about here. I'm actually going to encourage people to go and see Steve's words for yourself. You know, twiddle your thumbs while he's laughing. Fools and idiots have no knowledge of the subjects they're talking about. Let's have a look at this. And things like that. As I said, there's a couple of quite funny moments in it. Most of it is just boring, but don't not look at it. Look at it. I mean, Steve has a strange attitude. Do you know? I think I explained this in my last video. Steve accused me of deleting his comments from my videos, from my channel. He put up a complaint going, "Oh, yeah," and John Mack, his mate, who's his only mate now since I blocked Bob Branning. John Mack was actually saying, "Oh, but the comment was there and it disappeared." No, the comment was in the likely spam folder. I don't know why it was first published automatically and then went to the spam folder. I'm not YouTube. I'm not in charge of their algorithms. But Steve then says, "It appears that Ben has deleted my comment." Right, and this actually happened twice, and I've explained it twice. I don't delete comments at all, ever, unless they are abusive and rude and things like that. I am a free speech absolutist, and I would never do that. I would never do that. And I actually did publish the comment, and I explained to Steve, and he gave a sort of very half-hearted apology, and John Mack gave a load of excuses, and Bob Branning then posted some other stuff that I've deleted because I blocked him. But this is pretty typical anyway. This is just an example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to go forward now to 1222. Where is it? Here we go. Get the right place.
Now, the oil leak that...
Right, yeah. Yeah, this is... Scott has made a good point. He's studied the lunar rover quite considerably. He makes a number of points about it, most of which, at least half of which, Steve doesn't address in his series of films. But he does address some of the things that Scott has said and attempts to discredit them. And I'll just... here's a couple of examples. The first one is the lunar rover. Now you see a picture of the lunar rover there.
he describes is always on a rear wheel. It's never on the front wheel, it's
Right.
always on a rear wheel.
Well, it is though, and I'll come back to that later. But basically, Steve is what happens is Scott has pointed out what he thinks might be an oil leak on the lunar rover, on one of the lunar rovers, next to the back wheel, and so Steve is now addressing that.
Never on the front wheel, always on a rear wheel. And that's because as the rover goes along, the dust is kicked up from the front wheel. Of course, there's nothing in front of the front wheel to kick the dust up. So
Well, this is funny because later on he brings up a completely separate point about the lunar rover, where you do get dust coming up from the front wheel. So I'm not sure what he's talking about. But anyway, Steve doesn't really spot this particular contradiction in his testimony, but I'll be sure to point it out when it comes up again in a little while.
the dust will stick to the hub. The dust kicks up from the front wheel, and because there's an electrical charge on it, it tends to stick to stuff. It sticks to the rear wheel, and it sticks to the rear wheel, sticks to the rear wheel hub.
Right, well, this is what he's saying now, is that the dust on the moon is electrically charged. I don't know if that's ever been confirmed, but maybe it does stick to things, the way a balloon will stick to your head if you rub it. I mean, it's like an electroscope, you know, those things you used to play around with in school. But it all depends on the polarity of the charge, because as you know, like repels, opposites attract. So this is a possible explanation for what Scott identified as an oil leak. But as I said, that's not definitive. It's completely not definitive at all. So now we're going to go on to another... go forward. I don't have much more to say because Steve doesn't really make any more point. He just chuckles and smugly for a little bit longer. I'm going to go on to, what was it? 1740, right you are. Here we go. Oops.
Pictures from the moon, yet allow pictures like this. This is from NASA site. This is not from the Beano or from Nexus magazine. How would the inverse square law?
Oh, he's taking too long to get to the point now. I don't want to just sit through his chuckling. He's shown a picture from Mars, from one of the recent Mars missions. And he's making the point is, well, look, you can actually get good images from between these planets. But he says, oh, well, are these fake too? Is this done in a studio? Well, firstly, yes, maybe they are. Watch the Rich Planet program about that, which questions the actual Mars missions. Secondly, it's a still picture. It's not a TV image. So the bandwidth doesn't have to be half as wide. It's an electronic still, so it's a much smaller file than a large TV motion picture. And also, there's a possibility, like I said, that the question over the Mars missions altogether, and also the difference in technology. We must remember these Mars photos are recent; they come from the present day. These photographs that are sent from Mars. The moon missions come from 50 years ago. So technology has changed. Even if you don't take into account the secret space program. And the possibility that these Mars images are faked. It's possible the Mars images are faked. They're not made by the Phoenix lander and the Curiosity rover and things like that. They're actually made by... made by the secret government, maybe on secret bases on Mars, so it's possible they're filmed on Mars. Alternatively, they may be made on Earth in a studio, like the Apollo missions were, I believe. Now, a point I've got to make is if you do look at still images, there's no... I've not actually seen a television image from the planet Mars or from anywhere else. Are there any actual videos from Mars? Has anyone ever seen one? Let me know if anyone's made a live television broadcast from Mars, or even like a short clip of a motion picture. Let me know. I've never seen one. I've seen still images, a lot of still images. Now, indeed, when the Viking lander went there, I remember it took, I think, about 15 minutes to send back the photographs. And indeed, when the Russians went to Venus, it was the same thing. As in the 60s and 70s. So there's another good point. I mean, they went from being spending 15 minutes to send something back from Mars or Venus to being able to do a live broadcast from the moon. I know the moon is a lot closer, but it's still a question that needs to be answered. And again, maybe Hunchback has covered that. I'll have to check. Go forward a little bit. Where are we? No, go to 2430 first. There we go.
Dust would get inside a pressurised spacesuit. That's quite...
Okay, now what's... Alright, I can't go through all this bloody laughing. You have to skip to the end of each snatch of laughter. I'd have notes 20 pages long. What Steve is making, he talks about the dust. Now he's saying, well, how could the dust get inside a spacesuit because the spacesuit's pressurised? Because everything inside is going out because the spacesuit's pressurised. It's like the it's like the hazmat suits that the fire brigade wore on drills in my hospital. They were look like big balloons. They were inflated because they were designed to keep things outside and not let them in. And then there's several reasons. Like, firstly, the dust could get inside the suits. Well, it would depend, because obviously if it was a single EVA mission, you just get back into the LEM and you take the suits off in that tiny little space that's about the size of a phone box for each astronaut. You get your suit off, and that's the end of it. You just wrap the suit up. In fact, Steve suggests that suits could be simply wrapped in a hermetically sealed bag, and then the dust wouldn't get off the suit into the environment, and maybe get inside the electronics and get inside people's lungs and things like that. He also suggests, because of the static cling of the dust, that it would actually adhere to surfaces, so it'd be easy to keep on the suit, or maybe keep if it ends up being stuck to the floor or stuck to the bulkheads or something like that. You could just hoover it up or sweep it up or something. But on multiple EVA missions, you've got a different problem, because you have to take the suits off, then get them back on again, or at least even take off part of the suit. I don't know when they went inside to sleep on Apollo 17, because they actually went in and slept in the LEM. God knows how, in that little space. You'd have to sitting up, like a porter in his lodge. You know, sitting there like that. I've seen them do it. I did it myself. But either way, the dust is then in the environment, and the spacesuit is unpressurized, so it could get back into the. It could get back in to the suit when you go back out onto the moon, let alone get into the actual environment. And I mean, I'll go forward a little bit, because Scott makes a comment about the dust. Here we go. I'll just go forward to 1927. Is it here?
Filled with dust. Yeah, I'd quite like to see that.
Onto it.
Is that Mr. Henderson? Of course, you're going to have stuff, going out radially. Stuff will be ejected from the crater, from the impact point. But how would you be able to, perhaps you can demonstrate to us a recent meteor impact crater that is being filled with dust. Yeah, I'd quite like to see that.
Onto it, or dust from other impact craters?
Colin's right. I mean, what happens if you have a dusty spacesuit and you bring it into...
So I've just got... Sorry, my notes are mixed up. Sorry. All right, I don't know where I've put the wrong notes down. But basically, there's a clip in which Scott claims that the dust is radioactive. Now, and then Steve says, "Oh, it's not radioactive." Well, do we know that? Do we know it's not radioactive? I mean, a lot of things in space are radioactive. I mean, look at the dust that are inside the dust you get from inside nuclear power station disasters, and the water and stuff like that inside nuclear reactors. And also remember that. Over the moon, the dust is not. It may not only be electromagnetically charged. It's been exposed to an awful lot of X-rays and gamma rays and things like that over the years, cosmic radiation. What if it is radioactive? And what if there's a biohazard as well? I mean, they took the biohazard thing, that possibly there was actually life on it that could be hazardous to life on Earth. They actually put the astronauts into quarantine aboard the USS Hornet when they got back down. Some of the first TV images of the Apollo 11 crew, the broadcasts, come from them sitting inside their quarantine chamber staring out the window. You must have seen those. Now, one of the reasons that static cling on the suits is interesting, because indeed that particular video I talked about before, I can't remember what it's called, the show, the Apollo show or something like that. The very interesting one that was deleted from YouTube. What was it called? That was very interesting indeed, a brand new one, lots of new evidence. That talks about the possibility that the actual material on the floor of the studio was mixed with oil, and that was why it was sticking to the suits. That could be explained by static cling. I mean, like I said, if things stick to things when they're with static cling. But however, Green Magoose, that's going back a few years, isn't it? Do you remember Green Magoose? He used to get, do you remember, this was years ago in the early days of YouTube when it was all fun and there was nothing to fuss about, nothing to worry about. People just said what they want. He and his mate, whose name I can't remember, used to get into massive arguments with S-Vector. S-Vector was an Apollo supporter. And they together, I don't think, is S-Vector still around? I'm just going to check now, actually. But S-Vector made a number of, he made a number of videos. No, he's gone. He's gone, S-Vector has gone. These are the early, oh, I'm getting nostalgic. Oh, right. In the early days of YouTube, there was debates going on between YouTubers about the moon landings. Exactly the same as what we're having today. The equivalent of S-Vector was, the equivalent of Steve Mumbling back then was S-Vector, and there was Green Magoose, who was like me, and like Marcus and everyone. And they used to get into debates. They used to make video responses to each other that were very, very interesting and extremely amusing. He used a lot of jokes, and they used to take the mickey out of each other and things like that. Green Magoose is still on YouTube, but he makes films about, he makes little videos about Scottish history and things like that, so I don't really watch him anymore. But Green Magoose actually covered this because he actually filmed, he made some comments about the dust on the lunar surface, and he makes the comment that sometimes it seems to vary in grade and consistency. And you actually see it flowing very easily in some of the shots. So he makes the point. Well, he didn't actually make the point about static cling, but you can see that he was making a different point about, because S-Vector was going on about how, oh, it was just used to, there was no air on the moon, so it used to flow with gravity. It used to just fall down like it would act like heavy gravel, when it was actually just very, very thin fines, and just like really thin, like talcum powder consistency. And Green Magoose used to say, no, look, you can see it, and they got into arguments about the consistency of the dust. But unfortunately, those videos are gone now. But you can see quite clearly there's no static cling. So that's the point I tried to make. Anyway, we'll go forward a little bit because we come on to another subject now. Okay, I'm sure I've got this note right.
They'd say, you put that there yesterday and stood them
Oh, here we go.
comments. Let's just see what else the scientist has to say.
Because all you've got is a couple of pixels.
Yeah, and if they showed more than that, of course, they'd be saying fake.
Alright, now we're talking about the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. What happened was the LRO was a mission to the moon, which was designed to create a very detailed map of the moon. And while it was doing so, it photographed allegedly the Apollo landing sites, and some images were published of photographs of the Apollo landing sites. Let's go back a bit. And many of the Apollo believers say, there, it's proved. It's proved.
Before we look at Marcus Allen's cop, see what else there is going on here.
Okay. 3304. Hang on.
Okay, before we
basically what they were saying was...
see what else.
Okay. They were saying, therefore, that's proof that this is real. Now, firstly, it's not proof at all. Indeed, Jarrah White, almost the moment after these ones were published, a number of fake ones were published, who were openly fake, including some by Jarrah White. He said, look, I've managed to create the same effect using Photoshop. And if I can do that, NASA can. So, yeah, it's not at all in any way, shape or form, a proof. The LRO photographs of the Apollo landing sites do not prove the moon landings were real.
The scientist has to say.
Because all you've got is a couple of pixels.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if they showed more than that, of course, they'd be saying fake. They're fake. Look at...
I know, but it's a separate point. The skeptics do the same thing. If you show them a good photo of a UFO, they say it's fake. You show them a bad photo of a UFO, they say it's a blotch. It could be a star. But anyway, I'll carry on, Steve.
They're far too good to have really been taken from the lunar surface. You just can't. They just will not. They will never ever admit it. If you took them there and stood them in front of a descent stage that was still sitting on the moon, they'd say, you put that there yesterday.
Well, no, I would ask for evidence that it had been put there yesterday. And if evidence existed that this was a mock-up that they were showing me, say in the future, like if I was a future astronaut, I would actually demand evidence for that. And if there was evidence it was real, I'd accept it was real. As I said, I'm not. Who am I going to be scared of? The trolls? have you read what they've said about me? And the point of the matter is, though, well, firstly, it's not going to be possible, not just because we can't get back to the moon for some reason. Well, they reckon they'll do it in 50 years when Kennedy said, let's do it in 8. For some reason, they can't get back there in 50 years. But also, there's a move to make the Apollo landing sites off limits to future space exploration, which means that they're considered national monuments, although the moon is not a part of any nation. But the NASA and several other people are desperate to stop any future space missions visiting those sites, including some of the private ones, because there's some private independent space institutions now. So they're a bit worried about this, and they say these things should be treated as national monuments, because anything goes on there and it contaminates them. For example, extra footprints or tracks from a rover or something, and that would spoil it. You see what I mean? And the flags. I'll come on to the flags later, actually, because he says a lot. I'm going ahead of myself if I mention the flags now. But anyway, let's carry on.
You know you did. These people are just, I don't know. A question I'd be asking the scientist as well is, I'll ask Ben to ask the scientist if he's ever been under the care of a mental health professional.
Oh, so we're nuts now, are we? Could you see how unprofessional you are being, Steve? You're not doing yourself any favours here, mate. You're really not.
I think that would be an interesting question for it.
No, it wouldn't. Stupid
well,
question.
Let's just see what they're talking about here.
You can enlarge the pixels.
Talking about the LRO photos again, Steve.
If you're enlarging the pixels and it doesn't come out, it means that it was taken in extraordinarily low resolution in the first place.
So it's not very good quality. What's happening is they're talking about the LRO photos, and they're saying that you can the ability exists. There is an ability that exists to create much better images of the NASA could get much better images of those sites which they haven't used. For example, spy satellites, for example, that can read a newspaper from up in space. Why didn't they have those on the LRO so that we can get much better pictures than we do instead of these 1 meter per pixel blobs that we have here? Anyway, Steve's got an answer to that.
Answer your question that you asked, Andrew. Spy satellites.
They put in orbit around the moon are they're mapping satellites. They're not spy satellites.
All right. Just to cut him off laughing there again, he's saying that that's not their point. That the point of the LRO was not to actually to get photographs. That's not their the prime objective of their mission was not to get these photographs. The prime objective of the mission was to create an accurate map of the moon. To do that, they only need to be about as sensitive as the satellites used to create Google Earth. So that's about 1 pixel per square meter. And the LRO photos of the Apollo landing sites almost just like a byproduct. That's not. I don't think that's a very good answer, personally, because if I was designing this mission, I would actually. I think I would have anticipated the desire to see the Apollo landing site in better clarity. I've included an instrument on the craft that could do that, and the fact that it was not included, and no one even suggested that, I think means that Steve has not considered that wrongly, I believe. So I don't think that's really a suitable response. It's not really a very adequate explanation. I can go forward to another point.
Their tasking is
okay. So if I cut Steve off short, right, it's not. Well, it is personal because his constant ridiculing laugh I just can't stand. And if you just if I just let him talk and talk and talk, I have to put up with that between every point he makes, and it's just not really. Anyway, here we go.
Okay, here's Colin again, and he's going to tell us all about depleted uranium ammunition.
Well, prime example is the way that depleted uranium works on tanks. Like when it hits the outside of the tank, it will cause radiation to the outside of the tank, which passes radiation through the tank. And so the radiation on the outside will bounce the electrons out on the inside of the tank. So people get fried on the inside of the tank. It basically bounces.
Yeah, they use depleted uranium because it
All right.
because it supplies radiation to the inside of the tank, and this is quite handy actually. If you've got a tank coming at you, you can fire a depleted uranium shell at them, and it will penetrate the armour. And within 10 or 15 years, everyone inside the tank will have died of cancer. So.
No, this is silly. This is I shouldn't have. I don't know why I even included this, but basically, what Colin said about depleted uranium is incorrect. But it's part of a series. You can see by the if you watch the actual Apollo detectives, it's part of a segment in the discussion where we were talking about the Van Allen belts. Now, it's true, Colin did make a mistake there, and Steve corrects him. But it is irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the point of that entire segment of the video. So why, Steve, have you chosen to focus on it? Why have you chosen to focus on one little mistake that Colin makes? Anyway, you haven't actually disputed the other things we said about the Van Allen belts, have you? Okay, I'm going to move forward to another point now.
So I used to read, I used to go to the library, I used to watch things.
Yes, I'm much smarter than you and everybody else. Okay, well let's just go to Colin's introduction and have a quick look and listen to that. Okay, now the sound is not very good on this on this original video. Now, before we get into Marcus Allen showing us all how little he knows about television broadcasting and communications links and all this sort of stuff. And he knows absolutely nothing about it whatsoever.
Shut up.
There's a picture here. They're saying that this is a rain guard. This panel of experts here. They're saying this is a rain guard protruding on the side of the service module. This is what it looks like on the inside. This
No, it's command module. I think
actually looks like the inside of the capsule part of it to me, not the inside of the...
All right, it's a bit difficult to explain because there's no point really letting him carry on talking because you can't actually see the photo that he's talking about. But basically, it's a picture of a side of the command and service module where you see a window. You see a window which looks like it's got raindrops on it. Now, at one point, what Colin says, he uses the term service module. And then Steve, between his chuckling, explains how there are no windows on the service module because the service module didn't have a crew. There's no pressure hull. There's no need to see inside it or outside it. But in fact, that was not a Freudian slip. It was a slip of the tongue by Colin. He meant to say command module. The command module was essentially one of the two manned chambers of the spacecraft. The other being the ascent stage of the lunar module. The point of it is, I mean, there's an awful lot of things wrong with this particular picture. For example, there are several interesting things reflected off the shiny surfaces of this particular photo. But the point for this matter is it appears there's raindrops on it, which Steve explains as a clipped up transparency. It doesn't look like that to me, and in fact the transparency thing is very interesting because this comes up in Dark Moon and these accompanying videos by Bennett and Percy, which Marcus appears in, Marcus contributes to, which actually you see the famous TV image of the Earth from halfway to the Moon, and that does appear to be transparency, and you can see it clipped up in the Moon with the sunlight peeking around the outside. This is just I think he's taking Steve Mumbling. He's taking something that people on our side actually said and trying to apply it and use it to explain something to boost his side of the argument. And I think that's wrong. Anyway, we'll go forward again to 56 minutes. Hang on. There we go.
Tanner.
I think he's just.
Oh
He's like the laughing policeman, isn't he? He's like, well,
dear. I mean, this really does show how little research these people have done.
all right, okay. I'm going to go forward. I think this is just a repeat of a point he made earlier, so I'm going to leave that. Now, just go to 102. Is one final little snide little jab he wants to make.
to explain to us why we could get images from Voyager 2 from all the way out on the edge of the solar system there of Uranus.
All right, yeah. So he's talking about the Parkes Observatory, which was used for Apollo, was also used in the Voyager missions to get pictures from the distant planets, but not live TV pictures, not live TV. And again, I don't have all the answers to that.
And Neptune, why we can get those images, and the inverse square law doesn't prohibit those images, but would actually prohibit images from the moon. I'd love to hear that one. I suspect that Mr. Henderson actually doesn't know his planet from his elbow.
Have you been on the wacky backy, Steve? I mean, the only other people I know who laugh as much as you do are people who've taken too much blow.
All right, see what else we can find.
There we go.
Okay, here Marcus Allen is going to tell us about Nexus magazine. Remember, he's a distributor for Nexus.
Marcus is the UK distributor of Nexus magazine, and I very much recommend it.
NexusMagazine.com. If you want to have a look at it, it's the world's top-selling alternative news magazine.
What's funny about that? It's true.
I distribute it in the UK and Europe, and very proud to do so. Been doing it for 25 years
Yeah,
now.
well done, Marcus.
Still not bored with it. There's even more exciting information in it.
I'm not bored either. I've been subscribing now for almost 20 years, and I'm not bored either.
So magic mushrooms is our subject of choice in the current issue.
It's very interesting. The article on magic mushrooms was actually a very interesting one. Yeah.
Yes, and you'd have to be high on magic mushrooms, I think, to find anything in Nexus magazine believable.
And you'd have to be high on ganja to laugh as much as you do, to chuckle at every little thing, and you know that's the only other time I know people just giggle and laugh and guffaw like the way you do, Steve.
The only complaint I've got about Nexus magazine is the pages are too shiny. Because the only thing Nexus magazine is good for is for poking a hole in the corner and hanging it up in the carzy.
Alright, I'll leave that one. Okay, that's the end basically of part 2. He makes now. We're going to come on to his series of short films, but first of all, I need to take a break because you know I just I need a detox for a couple of minutes. I really do. So back shortly. Yes, I'm back. There it is, guys. Nexus magazine. This is the new one, actually. It's come out in December after we did those videos. China's ideology versus Western geopolitics, Alzheimer's disease infectious, and lots of other things. Who parked our moon? That was interesting. Who parked our moon? Yep, all kinds of things here. Very, very good. Britain's secret Antarctic mission. I've said a lot about that, haven't I? Yeah, that's do check it out. Steve is utterly and totally wrong and unfair in his assessment of that. Now we're going to go to, where are we now? Right, we're going to go to his third video, which is luckily a short one. He did a series of short ones. He's done actually 7 of these, actually 7 of these short videos. Luckily, they're only about between 5 and 15 minutes long. One's 20 minutes, and I won't have to go through all of them because my notes are much thinner, which indicates there's much less interesting things to say about them. Now, the first one is called the Damaged Lunar Rover Fender. Truth of Bender. Another Steve mumbling witticism, which he thinks makes him a great comedian. Now this is something that Scott brought up. He talks about how there was damage to what we call mud guards in England. Or you can't really call them that really because there's no mud on the moon. But here we go. We'll start. We'll let him introduce it because what Scott was saying was they may, for the different missions, that is Apollo 16 and 17, the similarities in damage or other features of the lunar rovers indicate that they were the same ones. So in other words, the people who filmed these missions in the studios used the same prop twice. So it's kind of a continuity error. And Steve's just going to explain a little bit about that. Here we go. I think he actually start at... what happened there? Oh, that's alright. 2019. That's it. One moment. Bear with me. Here we go. Let's just go for 3 minutes in.
Sagrin, whatever his name is, either. I haven't googled him yet, but just having a quick look at Scott Henderson's stuff. This is actually the Allis site. Go there if you must. Most of it's absolute drivel. But anyway, he's got a couple of images here. This one is the AS16 106-17390. Now AS16.
Steve is showing a picture of the Apollo 16 rover here.
And he's got another image here, AS17 137-20979, which is the one on the right.
That's the Apollo 17 lunar rover.
Okay, so that's the one on the right. That's from Apollo 17. And this is the one from Apollo 16. What his comment says is part of the fender had fallen off the rover during Apollo 16. Nothing was done to fix it during the photography and filming during this mission on Apollo 17, because what he's saying is they use the same rover, basically. It's all a film set. On Apollo 17, the astronauts mounted a map on the fender right.
It's true.
What's that?
They did.
To stop.
They use one of these like shiny, like plastic sealed maps as a to actually put over the mudguard, which because apparently they couldn't extend it properly.
Dust and dirt from flying up at them. Either all the rovers broke the right rear fender, or this is the same rover with the addition of a blue box at the rear to make it look different. Notice the oil-free wheels. Now, what's the first thing you notice about that comment? First thing you notice about that comment?
I don't believe it. He's spoken now for 2 minutes without laughing.
Okay. Either all the rovers broke the right rear fender, or this is the same rover with the addition of a blue box at the rear to make it look different. We'll address the oil-free wheels in a second. But I only see pictures of 2 rovers, don't you?
Yeah.
So how does he draw the conclusion?
You see 2 pictures of lunar rovers. Yeah.
Where's the picture of the Apollo 15 rover with the missing?
Oh, look, that is nitpicking. What he's saying is, well, I won't let him ramble on too long. But what he's basically saying is that what Steve said was what Scott said. Either all the rovers are, either it's the same, either they're different rovers, or they all use the same rover. He used the word all when he should have used the word both. That is literally the only thing, this long, drawn-out diatribe by Steve, which has gone on for about 3 minutes now. That's the point he's making. Okay, they used a different one for Apollo 15, and Scott should have said both rovers, not all rovers. He meant the ones from 16 and 17. That's what Steve is criticising him for. He's pulling him up for using a different word. He in no way is Steve actually addressing the point that Scott made.
Get me teeth in it a bit. With the missing rear right fender. Now, there is no picture because the Apollo 15 rover did not lose its right.
So it was a different
fender.
bloody prop.
So there's a gaping chasm number 1.
No, it's not. He just used it's not a gaping chasm. Scott used the wrong word. You're blowing this out of all proportion, Steve.
Oil-free wheel.
And all right, now we come on to the oil-free wheel. Because remember, earlier on, Steve was saying, Steve was talking about how how come it was an oil leak when only the back wheels got covered in oil? I think it's dust kicked up by the front wheel. That's why the front wheel's clean and the back wheel is covered with dust.
We'll just look at this very quickly because it's not going to take very long to address.
Thank goodness for that.
As you can see, there is already starting a build-up of dust adhered to there and to the hub and to the shaft.
Yes, the problem is the wheel that's gathering the bit of dust is the front wheel, not the back wheel. So maybe if you are getting dust on the back wheel, you say the dust is on the back wheel, not the front. Scott says the oil leak is at the back. You're now saying there's dust on the front wheel as well, when you claim the back wheel. The dust on the back wheel explains what Scott thought was oil. Again, you can't have it both ways either. Right, let's just move forward slightly. 442.
So what did NASA have to say about this? Okay, extracts from Apollo mission flight evaluation reports.
Oh, okay. There's no need for Steve to read all this out. You can look it up if you want. It's basically NASA's official report on the technical problems with the lunar rover on Apollo 17. That is the mudguard that was damaged, which they did makeshift repairs on. The astronauts apparently did makeshift repairs using one of the maps, one of the lunar maps which they had with them, which is basically a laminated piece of paper, which they then stuck in place. Again, this does not prove or disprove what Scott is saying, because he's never said that. Because Steve's point is that explains everything, and therefore it discounts what Scott said. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Okay, that's all. Thank goodness, that's all there is of interest in this film, and I'm only over a third of the way through it, so it means the rest of it I don't have to watch. Otherwise, I'd have made a note. So let's go on to the next one. This is a film called Marcus Allen, The Fake Moon Landing. Fake. Right, okay, here we go. Just move forward a bit. That's it. Okay, so actually, no, this is.
Okay.
No, so I'll skip most of this because this is Marcus talking. This is just
together on your panel the other day.
Hang on, go back to 9.
All three of you. It was taken under control.
Slightly.
Certain video. Allen's Freud, but the Freudian.
Okay. I think I can actually skip this one. It seems, based on my notes, that Steve is simply repeating the point he made in the main film about Marcus at the British Interplanetary Society, saying did he or did he not doubt the actual moon landings, and I've already explained that. And at 9:25 into this film, which is 16 minutes long. So from 9:25 until 16 minutes, it's all just more of Marcus's Freudian slips. Right, I'll skip that. Don't need to address that particular video anymore. So now we go on to the next video. Thank goodness we're getting through these quickly, aren't we? Apollo 17 wet flag. Really? Let's see. Here we go. This is another short one. Okay, so let's pull up my notes. Hang on.
Okay, well, as weary as I am of the fake moon landing lunatics,
you'll never be weary of it.
I thought I'd just have there's a couple more pictures that I think are worth having a look at.
Oh no! Oh bloody hell! Oh god! Hang on. Oh, he's uploaded another one. He's uploaded another one of these bastards. All right, hang on. I'm just gonna deal with this first. I'll sort it out in a minute.
Just had my breakfast. Now, there's this one, and there's the one with the flag in the lunar module, reflection in the lunar module window. I'll have a look at that one a bit later on.
Come to that. Yeah.
I came across this one first. Now, this is again Scott Henderson, and he's saying he's given the Apollo image library reference number there, AS17, so it's from Apollo 17. It's image 134-20383. This flag has been exposed to water and is very wet indeed. Of course, Mr. Henderson knows that because he saw the flag being immersed in water and he actually felt it.
All right, Steve rambles on an awful lot, but the point he makes is that he doesn't think that flag was wet. What he thinks is just a lighting effect caused by folds in the material, which make it look as if it's wet, and he gives several reasons why he doesn't think it's wet. And to be honest, he may be right. That might actually be the case. So this might be an error on Scott's part. However, Steve doesn't address several other points relating to flags, and that flag generally. because he's going to do an experiment. Apparently he's going to get hold of this same flag, because apparently that particular flag is still on sale. Not the original one, of course, that's on the moon, or in Area 51, I believe. But you can actually buy the same flag from the supplier. It's still on sale. Now, Steve, in a sense, I think may well have proved himself right in this particular point, but in a sense it's a deviation from other much more interesting points. Now this particular flag is, I'll come on to it in a minute, but basically there is other evidence that of moisture or wetness in several shots on the moon. Now one of those relates to some spoiled photographs from the Hasselblad camera on one of the missions, where you can see like it looks like there's been some liquid in the actual interior of the camera, which has caused marks on the film. Now this has been explained officially by NASA, that the NASA, you see, they actually had some little straws sticking out of the helmet where there were little pockets of orange juice, so the astronauts could actually drink inside their helmet by just sucking on these straws without moving their hands, because they couldn't use their hands to get at their faces and things like that. You couldn't hold anything like that. So there were some things attached to the inside of the suit and some straws which were sticking up, which the astronauts could just go like that. They could do that with them. Now, the thing about it is what, in a sense, what NASA are therefore admitting is that liquids can actually flow in a vacuum, even to the point where they flow to another part of the suit, even outside the suit, and get into a camera. They can do this even if Steve is right about the Apollo 17 flag not being wet. That's an important film. Now there's an interesting story behind the Apollo 17 flag, because the Apollo 17 flag was different to the others. It was a lot bigger, and it was made of a different material. It was made of canvas, whereas the other flags were smaller and made of nylon. Now, the Apollo 17 flag was the one that had originally hung in the mission control room at Houston in Texas, at the NASA center there. Now, you can actually see it in some of the footage from the earlier missions on the mission control room. Another little aside about the mission control room in Houston, right? Have you ever seen Operation Avalanche? I really do recommend it. It's a really, really good sort of found footage docudrama about the fake moon landings. It's an independently produced film. It's really good. And the film crew turned up there, and they got permission from NASA to film in the old mission control room, and which is now preserved as a kind of museum. And so they were filming a film. They didn't actually tell NASA the kind of movie they were making. They just said they were documentary filmmakers making a film about the Apollo moon landings. They didn't give NASA any more details, and NASA didn't ask. So this sort of docudrama, which is about the idea that the moon landings were faked, some of it is actually filmed in Mission Control, the original Mission Control room from the Apollo program. Game, set, and match, guys. It's a really good film, actually. It's quite. I mean, I talked to Marcus about this, and Marcus, you know, and I said to him, look, the ending is very violent. It is very violent and shocking at the end, but it's very thought-provoking. It's a very thought-provoking sort of real-life type style movie. It's, you know, like the Blair Witch Project. It's like that. Anyway, as Ronnie Corbett used to say, on with the joke. Now, the point of the matter is, let's go back to the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. The films, the photographs that were taken of the flag, I can close this now, I don't need this video anymore. The photographs that were taken of the flag, sort of the Apollo landing sites, supposedly by the LRO, have been proven right by Apollo believers, Steve Mumbling and people and other people who believe in Apollo, as the real thing. They're photographs of the real landing site, and they're real. Now, even if you make a fuss about it, saying, well, you could easily fake this, you could easily fake that, you could put in these 1 pixel per square metre images of the lunar descent stage. I mean, Jarrah White did it, he faked it within hours, etc, etc, etc. So therefore it's not proof the moon landings are real. But NASA and the believers, they'll say things, well, it looks all so real, look, the flag is still there, the footprints are still there, and the flag is still there. You can see the shadow of the US flag still hanging over the moon. Okay, well, there's some debate over whether the footprints actually would last, because we used to be told they'd last for millions of years because there's no rain or wind to blow them away. That's now changed to, oh, they might last a century because solar wind and moonquakes and things like that would actually dislodge them. But the point of the matter is, how long would the flag last? As I said, the flags are all small ones made of nylon, apart from Apollo 17, which is made of canvas. Now, why would a flag not last long on the moon? Well, the answer comes from the Mir space station. Because, as you know, the Mir space station was the forerunner to the International Space Station. It was put up in space in the 80s, yes, in the 1980s, and I think it lasted until the end of the 90s. Now, between the mid-80s and the late the 1990s, a massive change came over the nation of Russia. Of course, it went from well, it was a process that sort of began with the election of the selection of Mikhail Gorbachev as president, and it ended officially in December of 1992. But basically, 1991. Sorry, officially at the end of 1991 in December. But it was an ongoing process that had been going on. It took a number of years. But basically, the USSR, the Soviet Union, turned into the modern Russian Federation. Now, when that process was officially completed in December of 1991, the astronauts on board Mir were ordered to go outside and take down the flag, because they actually were flying the old hammer and sickle red flag on the space station, the official flag of the Soviet Union. And they said, look, we can't fly that flag anymore. All Russian government institutions are now banned from flying the hammer and sickle red flag. You've got to take it down. And on our next supply mission, we'll bring you a new Russian flag, the Russian Federation flag. And so the astronauts dutifully obeyed. They went outside, they climbed up to the top of wherever it was they were flying the flagpole, wherever the flag was. And it wasn't flying, it was just floating in space, but you know what I mean, it was outside. And they stared at it, and there was hardly anything there. There was just a few ragged threads. It looked as if moths had been eating it. And so they brought back the remains of the flag into the spaceship, and they said, what's going on? It's gone. It's like it's full of like holes and ragged. It's nothing there. And the answer was that during the however many years, 8 or so years, that the Mir space station had been up in space for all that time, that flag had been subjected to continuous meteorite bombardment. Tiny little specks of rock, just little specks of dust, basically. It's like, you know, I don't know if you've ever been in a sandstorm. I mean, obviously in the Middle East or in other places where there's desert, you have sandstorms. You know what it feels like. But even outside there, if you're on a beach in the sea and and the wind's very high, you're on a beach or something, and you feel that kind of sand blast of these little bits of sand hitting you. All right, that's kind of what we're talking about. Now there is a similar effect in space. It's much smaller. It's much less violent, because otherwise, of course, spacesuits would be worn away very quickly, and you couldn't ever do EVAs. But basically, there is a slow but very persistent sandblasting effect on everything in space, which is caused by tiny little micrometeorites, smaller than grains of sand, smaller than grains of dust. And they, as individuals, they don't do much damage. They just basically penetrate and they leave you there. But over time, they do damage, especially to things like fabric, just textile. They did so much damage. The effects over a period of time, say a number of years, can be seen on the flag, on the Soviet flag that had been flying over Mir. And the Mir space station has now crashed. It's gone. It's fallen into the sea. But they replaced it with another flag. But the point is that in just 8 or 10 years, micrometeorite bombardment in low Earth orbit reduced a piece of fabric, to just threadbare scraps. Yet we're supposed to believe that in 50 years, micrometeorite impact on the moon did nothing to reduce very thin nylon flags to just little scraps. Because you can see in the LRO, you can see and Jarrah Wright made this point. You can see the shadow of the flag, so the flag's still there. Maybe whoever was concocting these fake images for the LRO didn't think of that, did they? Okay, next video. Now we come on to the lunar module flag reflection. Yes. I've just noticed that Steve's put up another one of these, so I'm going to have to... Oh, God. After that, I'm drawing a line. I'm saying no more. Okay, here we go.
Well, okay, we're back with the fake moon landing brains trust on the Ben and Ben Jones channel. The Apollo detectives are at 2:21:03.
Okay, I'm going to forward a little
We're going
bit.
to talk about reflection.
To 3:25. Here we go.
in the...
It's easier to find the right space on these
It's
shorter
supposed
films.
to show.
Stop this clip. Okay.
Okay, now what
We'll
we're
come
talking
back to
about
this
here, what we're talking about here is basically, I'm going to have to show you a few images now, because I don't think you'll really actually understand what we're talking about unless you see these images. So I'm going to show you one of the images now. That what you just saw was a picture of the. It was actually basically the ladder photo from Apollo 11. Now look at the window on the LEM to the upper right of the astronaut, and you will see this. That's the picture that's under question, and this is what Steve wants to address. Because Marcus and I, Marcus, Scott, Neil, Charlie, and the other guy, what's his name? I've forgotten his name now. The bloke that Steve wanted to put into the wood chipper. Oh, who said he did? Colin. Sorry, Colin. I'm getting Steve mumbling fever. I can't remember things. Okay, but Steve, there's an image in that particular window which looks like a reflection of the outside, and what you see in it is something that looks a bit like the flag from the Apollo 11 mission. Steve thinks otherwise. He's going to show you now, isn't he?
Okay, so we saw the image of the flag. Just, it's easier to call it the flag and the pole for the time being, I think, reflected in the lunar module window. Of course, it's not the flag and it's not the pole, as will become obvious as this video progresses. Okay, so this is from the NASA image library. This is AS11 375467. AS11 means it's from Apollo 11. And it's a picture of the picture of the flag on the lunar surface taken from the lunar module pilot window. That's the one on the.
Okay, did I get a copy of this flag? Okay, basically, I don't think I've got a copy of this. Yes, I have. Right, I'm just going to show you the picture he means. Okay, that is a picture of the Apollo 11 flag taken from the lunar module window. Now, what Steve is going to suggest now is that that can't be, what you see there cannot have been reflected in that window. The reflection you see in the window cannot be this reflection of this object.
If you're looking at the front of the lunar module, that would be the one on the left-hand side, to the left of the hatch.
One of the points he makes is that, firstly, it's in the wrong window because the flag was over on the other side. On the front of the LEM, that is, you can't really see which is the front and back very easily because of the design. But the side with the door in, you see the reflection on the left window, but the flag was on the other side. And there's another triangular window there, and the reflection should have been in that, if there was a reflection at all. Okay, fair point you might think, but let him carry on.
Now when we look at this, image, we can see that the flagpole, I'll hold this blooming stool that I'm doing, the flagpole,
get on with it,
is obscured by the...
Okay, he's just going to let him spin on a little bit because what he's basically saying is that the actual flag you see from that window looks very different to what is reflected. It looks very different. Now, that's making a number of assumptions. Okay, the point about the windows, which window it was, is fair enough because the flag should have been on the other side. Okay, the flag also looks different. I mean, you can see by the way it's folded, the fact there's a little bit of a curvature in the actual way the flag hangs. You can see it's been folded up and kept somewhere before it's been actually let out. It's they basically unfold it and sort of ruffle it out and then they hang it up. And that inevitably means it's not flat, whereas what you see reflected looks like something flat and straight. Okay, but that assumes several things. Firstly, that these two things cannot be reverses of each other, which a flag would be. And Steve makes a bit of a joke about this later, which is one of the few genuinely funny parts of his video. It's the only thing he says which is actually really worth laughing at. But this assumes that the reflected flag, if it was a reflected flag, in the LEM window And what you see published, that is that there was a flag to the right of the front of the LEM, which looks very different, which has a shorter pole. It's not, the folds don't obscure the top of the pole, etc., etc. You assume that the two things were the two scenes, that is the ladder photo and then the flag, were filmed on the same day's shoot. What if they were filmed on different days shoot? You can't assume, Steve, right? If you think that the Apollo missions were faked, as I do, you cannot assume that everything was shot in sequence. What if what you're looking at here, that is the picture of the flag that was published and the film of the flag that was published, was actually filmed on a different day's shoot to the ladder, to the actual astronauts emerging from the LEM, the ladder photo, which is where the reflection is. What if it was a different day's shoot? What if they filmed some other footage of the flag, which they then edited out? You see, this is what you see does look like a flag that's reflected. There's you can distinctly see there's a structure to it that looks like the US flag, including a square panel at the top, which looks like where the stars are, in the stars and stripes. Interesting thing as well is that one of the things Steve says, the LEM window is convex, so it's a slightly convex window, probably because it's something to do with pressure differentials or something. Well, indeed, the actual image you see in this convex window is slightly curved. The flagpole in the reflection is slightly curved, which is what you would expect if it was a reflection from a convex surface. You also see a number of structures behind it, which Steve is going to come to, and so will I. But first, let's listen to Steve's explanation for what he thinks the flagpole is. So we go forward a bit.
There is the bar to assist with fake Muppets, calling the... Okay, so here we are inside the lunar module, and we can see this is what...
Okay, he's just showing up a picture of the inside of the lunar module, which I'll show you in a minute.
Moonfake Muppets are calling...
Moonfake Muppets? He's trying to be original now.
The flagpole, it's actually a graticule on the window.
Right, yeah. It's a graticule. Now, if you look at this picture, I'll show you the picture now. You will see there is a graticule. Now, this is something embossed onto the inside of the window of the Apollo mission. This is Apollo. This is the lunar module. The lunar module has this basically embedded in the glass. It's basically an image embedded in the glass. It's actually a navigation aid. It's called a graticule, and you can see it there. You can just see it there. Now, Steve says that's actually what the flagpole is. It's just this graticule. Just a few slight problems, and that is that you'd see there's a few slight problems with that. The graticule does not resemble the image reflected. For example, if you look at the graticule, you'll see it's not just a straight line. It has a straight line, but it also has two horizontals at the top and bottom. Now, in the reflection, you don't see these horizontals. Also, it's not curved. It's not curved. It's actually straight. If you look at it from the inside, you'll see it's straight. And you might argue, well, curvature. You can get a curvature through refraction from the outside, but you don't get that on convex windows. You can get a magnification, as you see with people who have very thick, glasses on their eyes. But you don't get distortion like you do with a reflection. Also, the graticule has superimposed measurement marks on it, and these measurements that go behind the flagpole. And that's very interesting, because you can actually see these measurement marks on the reflection, which Steve doesn't point out, but I do. I'm surprised he didn't spot that actually and try to use it as evidence that that was a graticule. The thing about it is, though, the marks, if you look at the marks, the measurement marks on the reflection, they're completely straight, which is what you'd expect, because they're completely straight on the inside. You can see quite clearly they're completely straight on the inside. However, the marks go completely straight and the flagpole curves slightly, so the marks, because they're straight, converge on the reflection. And I do think it's a reflection. Whereas if that straight line, which you think is the graticule and not a flagpole, really was the graticule, it would also be straight. That's where I think you've got it wrong as well. Now we're going to go forward a bit longer, because Steve has an explanation for what he thinks is the big square thing, which Marcus and Scott thinks is a flag, and I think it's quite likely to be a flag too. Let's go forward. There we go.
Okay, so here we have Neil Armstrong.
Right, he's showing another picture now. Have I? Yeah, I've got it. Okay. This is the picture that Marcus. Sorry, this is the picture that Steve is now showing. It's a picture of Neil Armstrong, a photograph allegedly taken of Neil Armstrong, the astronaut, inside the lunar module. And look at that big white thing there. Steve's going to explain.
Inside the lunar module. And we see the notes hanging up here, the mission notes, the running order, if you like, for the mission.
It's a clip.
There we go. It's not quite square. It's slightly.
He's basically saying it's a clipboard. What you see in that reflection is something inside the lunar module. It's a clipboard. It's a clipboard hanging up, the one you saw in that picture. Well, there's several things wrong with that. Firstly, if there was all this massive amount of sunlight that illuminates the snowy landscape that you used to see in England, Steve, remember? How come that glare doesn't stop you seeing inside? As you know how difficult it is to see inside through a window when you're outside and there's a lot on a sunny day. Second problem is, it's on the wrong side of the cabin. Take a look at the photo, look at Neil, look at where he's sitting. He's sitting facing the control panel. The windows are to the left and right of him. You can actually see the window frame behind the back of his head. It's just by the nape of his neck. You can see the edge of the window frame, the left-hand window frame. How do I know that? Well, because I've looked at the design for the interior of the LEM. Look at what's above. Look above the control panel, and you see a curved, sort of arched ceiling above. There's an arched ceiling. There's several things attached to it. There's a roll of toilet paper as well for some reason. There's some loudspeakers above. Now that is quite clearly the front. We're looking front. We're looking forward. We're looking at the front of the lunar module. And I know that because if you look at the designs, you look at the lunar module being built, which when it was being put together at Grumman, you can actually see the actual pressure hull before they attached all the other things outside. You can see that arch-shaped structure above the front. It looks very different once they put all the outer panels on. And you can see here that the clipboard is on the wrong. It's on the wrong side. It would need to be hanging behind Neil, where the camera is basically, for it to be visible from the outside through the window. Now, there's a possibility, of course, that they actually had it on one side, then they moved it to the other. That's a possibility. Maybe when they were struggling to get those big space suits on. But you cannot use this photo as evidence to prove your point. To be honest, if you taken a photograph facing the back of the LEM and the clipboard was there, then maybe you would have a point. If you could find such a photo, I'll accept that maybe you've got a point. But you need to find that photo, Steve. You need to find if you can, or maybe I could do that. I'm not saying I wouldn't do that. But if they were hanging it behind earlier, then maybe you could say maybe they moved the clipboard back to the front. That's a possibility. But this photo in itself is not proof that what you're looking at there is what was reflected in the window. Even if you take aside the other things, such as the curvature and stuff like that.
Rectangular, I think. It's exactly the same shape as.
Yeah. Okay. That's all we need from this particular video. Now we go on to another video. It's we're almost at the end now. This is Buzz Aldrin's watch set to Florida time. So what? Here we go. Right, so where do we need to go? Right, okay. Right, go forward a bit, 45 seconds in.
Oh, hello again, and happy new. I said, yes, what these people have. That's not what he's saying here.
Okay.
Nice arrow. Viewfinder again, so apologies for this sloppy production. And he's blown it up even further.
Now this is the part of where we discussed the watch. Now, what you see is in the classic photo of Buzz Aldrin on the moon, the one which is the most famous from lunar images, you see that Buzz Aldrin on his right wrist is wearing a wristwatch. Now this came up earlier on and Steve made a mistake, which to his credit, he admitted. But you can see here that Scott has actually magnified the image of the watch, and you can see quite clearly that it's about 11:15. It's showing about 11:15. Now the thing about it is, this is the wrong time. If you look at the mission control now, the time on board the spacecraft during this particular during this particular mission was basically the time in Houston, Texas. That was where mission control was, in Houston. So now what happened was, though, to begin with, when the mission was launched, they were on East Coast time, that's Florida, because the mission was launched from Florida and controlled from Texas. The United States is a big country and it has 4 time zones. So they actually, what happened was, as soon as that mission was launched, it was up in the air. So they used East Coast time before they launched the rocket. So the astronauts put all their watches onto East Coast time, so they would know when they were supposed to turn up at briefings and training sessions and things like that. And so they actually got onto the rocket on time, and they didn't miss it, so the rocket took off without them. That kind of thing. Once they were up in space, they were on mission control time. So that, I think, is an hour earlier. So they would have to set their watches back. Now, there would be plenty of time to do this during the journey between the Earth and the Moon. It took a few days to get there. They had plenty of time. And Steve says, oh, well, it doesn't matter. So what if Buzz left his watch on Florida time? Maybe he just didn't really matter at all. I won't play all this because I can explain what Steve says. He's basically saying it doesn't matter. Firstly, he says, well, it's possible that Buzz didn't bother. You know, if I'm flying from Australia somewhere, I might stop off in Singapore. I might spend a couple of days there. I'll change my watch to Singapore time, things like that. Or maybe I won't bother. Steve, you cannot compare flying from Australia to Singapore with flying from the Earth to the Moon. This is the first time this had ever been done. Buzz Aldrin was a professional. He'd been highly trained. I imagine, as in those war movies, you know, where they go, synchronise watches, everybody. I would be very surprised if those Apollo astronauts were not trained to do exactly that. You may think it's just a slight error. All he has to do is look at his watch and think, hang on a minute, oh, I've just got to take it back an hour. But you don't know, with all the things he had to focus on and concentrate on when he was on the lunar surface, all the problems he had to deal with, all the dangers. What if he forgot? What if he forgot this is the case? He looked at his watch and just for a slip of his mind, he thought it was an hour later than it was. All kinds of things could go wrong. He could run out of oxygen. He could not known how long he was out on the surface. So it is significant that that watch was not set. I mean, you make a point earlier in the video, which I'm not going to go into now, because you are basically right, and I admit that. And I did make the point in the video that I thought, well, I didn't actually say the watch wouldn't work in a vacuum, but I said, would it work in a vacuum and at very low temperatures? Would that happen? I didn't say it would. I said, would it? And you then showed me that the Omega Moon watch which is now a very, very highly sought after, it's a very, very sought after sort of fashion accessory now. It's considered to be very prestigious to have this. Other than the Rolex Submariner, which I think is the one which works underwater, which James Bond uses, the Omega Speedmaster Moon watch is the watch to have if you want to be really cool. And you can pick one up for like about £2,000. I know Scott said 25,000. Maybe he just missed the zero. I don't know. Or maybe he was thinking of special watches, antique ones. I don't know. But basically, obviously, this needed to have some customization. For example, the strap had to be very, very long for it to fit around the cuff of his spacesuit, because it has to be much bigger than a watch which you normally put around your own wrist. You can see that in the photograph. It's got a very long strap. So Buzz can fit it all the way around his cuff. But apart from that, you are correct that Omega are very, very... I mean, I said I'd never seen an Omega advert where they mentioned the moon thing. And I was thinking, I think I might have got confused with Hasselblad, because Hasselblad don't make a big deal about how their products are used on the moon. They've had one advert, that's all. Omega do. And what's more, Omega very proudly boast that they put their watches, their commercially available watches, through the very, very same checks that they did the one which Buzz took to the moon. So they have to work at very low temperatures, they have to be able to work in a vacuum, and things like that. And they have to, and all the other things, radiation, temperature, variation, stuff like that. Okay, so that's true. And you make the point, it's, you know, someone else I think said something about, well, would the batteries function? Well, it doesn't have any batteries because it's a wind-up. You said it's a wind-up watch, it just has a spring. It's just simple clockwork. Because for that very reason they chose a clockwork wind-up watch rather than an electric one, for that very reason, which you explained. But then you say, is it far simpler? Is it simply in stopwatch mode? Did you just put it in stopwatch mode and what you're looking at is actually mission elapsed time? Well, firstly, it's a bit of a coincidence that the photo was taken at 11:15 to whatever is it, because you can't see the little small dials. You say it's 110 hours or something into the mission. Isn't that a little bit of a coincidence? And also, if he wanted to put it on stopwatch mode, when did he do it? Because he can't have done it on the moon because he's got those big gloves. You couldn't never press those. You couldn't wind. Firstly, could you wind it up if it stopped? You couldn't because you've got these big gloves. You couldn't handle those little things with that. They didn't have the big tabs which Hasselblad put on the cameras. But even that would make it very difficult. But that's another point which Marcus goes into. So you couldn't wind if that watch stops. You can't wind it up because you can't fiddle with those great big gloves with the winder. Secondly, if you want to adjust the mode, the little pushers, you can't press them with those big gloves. So if he put it on stopwatch mode, he must have done it before he put on the spacesuit. Which, I mean, then he'd have to subtract however long it was between when he could put it on stopwatch mode and when he put it on the watch. Wouldn't it be when he put the watch on because he'd have his spacesuit on before he went out on the lunar surface? So wouldn't it be so he'd have to subtract the time it took between putting it on stopwatch mode and when he stepped out? Wouldn't it be simpler just to adjust his watch to mission control time? That's the point you fail to address. Okay, so that's enough from that particular one. Now we're going to go on to what I thought was the last one, but is not. That is the reflection of it's called the reflection of the flag in the LEM window 2. Another good point made. Now, this, I'll just give you a bit of background here. Hang on a second. I'll just go forward.
This is the flag.
Luckily, this is a short one. I thought this was the last one I was going to have to deal with, but unfortunately, it's not.
In the lunar, hanging up with the lunar module. Got out of the lunar module, so it's obviously all a fake. And I did a debunking video showing this is a graticule and this is a
right.
clipboard with
And I've explained why.
notes on it hanging up with a lunar module.
And I've explained why the graticule and clipboard explanation does not fit. It does not fit. It does not explain that as that not being a reflection.
But someone left me a comment that kills the argument that this is a flag stone dead.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely stone dead. And I'll show you the comment. The comment is from Arnie Saknussemm.
All right, yeah, I saw this comment. Arnie Saknussemm is the name of the user, and I saw the comment. I didn't know Steve was going to make a big deal out of it because it really doesn't prove anything. So for a strange name, Arnie Saknussemm is a strange name because it's actually a character from Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth, and I wonder if that's the reason he chose it.
And Mr. Saknussemm says, I agree, not a reflection of a flag. If it was, the pole would appear on the right-hand side of the reflection. And when I read this comment from Mr. Saknussemm, I slapped my forehead because I thought he's absolutely right. Absolutely right. If this is a reflection of...
Okay, and Steve just goes on for half this video repeating over and over again and trying to give several other pictures demonstrating how that is correct. Okay, but again, this is based on the assumption that all the Apollo images in the studio, if it was faked, which I think it was, it's based on the assumption that these images were all shot, these photographs, were all shot in sequence. And you're not simply looking at a reflection of a part of the set which was later in which material was shot that was later discarded. Or maybe the entire set was discarded and they decided to redesign it. You're assuming that it's all in sequence, that the whole thing was filmed on the same set, in the same order, on the same day. Why would you make that assumption? Now, I must say in this particular video, this is the only video which I actually enjoyed, because if you go forward to 4 minutes,
side of the flag.
I won't play you it, you can see it for yourself.
Flag up once they were both.
Oh, hang on, is this the one?
2 videos back. We'll see. Show something in. Well, yeah, anyway.
Actually, no, it's not this video, it's another one. No, it is this video, yeah. Actually, it's other. Oh, it's not new. Sorry, it's is it? Hang on, where is it? Yeah, it's not new. Oh, I get it. Okay, I made a mistake. Okay, this is the only part of Steve's video which is actually any good, and it's the final video, which I'm not going to play. You can go and watch it yourself. He doesn't actually make a. Well, basically, the rest of the video I just showed you was actually just simply Steve repeating Arnie Sacknesson's point, which again I say is not conclusive. And the last video in this series, I hope he's not uploaded anymore, has he? No, I made a mistake. It's actually the only video which I actually enjoyed. It's actually where Steve actually he actually puts a flag up outside in his garden, and he says it's the Australians landed on the moon in 1973, and it's quite funny. It's really funny, actually. You see, Steve, what I'm saying is, Steve, actually, you do have a sense of humour when you are really decent, professional sense of humour. You know, you really do, and you can make good jokes when you want to make good jokes. And indeed, in the next video, you talk about how you spot something inside the camera, something inside the reflection, which you said, or the reflection photo, which you say, is proof that the moon landings were faked in 1999. And you know it because there's a picture of Darth Maul from the Star Wars film from that. And I looked at it, it's green, not red, but it does look a bit like him. But that's actually quite funny. You can make good jokes when you want to. You also film... You've got a triangular mark on your hand, which I thought was very interesting, and you make a bit of a joke about him being abducted by aliens. Well, maybe you shouldn't joke about it, Steve. You never know. What's interesting about that particular shot where you're filming your hand with the mark on it is you're outdoors, and you say you can't see through the viewfinder in sunlight. Now, that's very strange because there are many things to do with the TV camera they used on Apollo, which meant that they had to deal with that situation on the moon, and maybe you didn't address that. Anyway, that's the end of Steve's videos, thankfully. There's one more issue I want to address, and I'm going to do it now. Okay, now there's one more thing I want to talk about. It's not actually something that came up in Steve's video. He didn't mention this. However, a few people brought it up in the comments section of the previous video, or the one before, I think in the Apollo Detective one as well. And it concerns Apollo 13. Apollo 13, of course, 7th man mission to the moon. The best thing to do is go here to Wikipedia, or Wikipedia as Henrik from Red Eyes calls it, and you can actually get the basic information about it. April 11th, 1970, it launched from Kennedy Space Center, aborted after oxygen tank explosion 2 days later on the way to the moon, crippling the service module and on which the command module depended. So basically half the spaceship was knocked out. Despite great hardship and limited power, loss of cabin heat, shortage of water, and makeshift repairs for critical systems, the crew did return safely to Earth on April the 17th, 6 days after the launch. And of course, what they did was, luckily, because they had the lunar module, it saved their lives, because they could use the lunar module engine and indeed the life support systems on it to actually to stay alive, to actually get back to Earth. They had to go to the moon. Once they were on the way to the moon, they couldn't just turn around and come back. It's not like a car. They had to go to the moon and use the moon's gravity to come around and use the lunar module pilot, the lunar module engine. Very interesting thing. Now, the story is classic one. It's been made into a movie with Tom Hanks, etc., etc. We know, oh, Houston, we have a problem. Everyone knows the Houston, we have a problem thing. It's a completely and utterly it's a really amazing story of heroism, and everyone was glued to their TV sets. There were prayers said in church, please bring those astronauts home safely. Obviously, like, it was before my time, but you know, again, as with the moon landing, my parents have told me all about it, how tense it was, how incredibly worried everybody was about the whole thing. And it all ended happily. They got the guys home safely. So, well, the question is, if it was faked, why was it faked? I mean, how it was faked is obvious. And there's several theories that have come about that Marcus has talked about, that added spice to the whole Apollo project. But at the same time, it gave them an excuse to cancel it if they wanted, because apparently it was cancelled prematurely. And of course, no one's been back to the moon since. It's amazing, isn't it, when you think about it? And when Apollo 17 took off in 1972, everyone thought, well, that's okay. We'll be the moon base. We'll be back. Go back and build the base. Then we'll be taking our holidays in the Sea of Tranquility, etc., etc. But of course, that never happened. And any space fan or science fiction fan from the 1960s who could look forward to the present day would gasp in dismay at how little progress has been made since then. You mean you haven't gone beyond low Earth orbit? What's wrong with you guys? It's 2019. I read a science fiction book that said I could take my holidays on the moons of Jupiter by 2019. I was looking forward to retiring on Mars. Things like that. So, I mean, the full story is a complicated one. It's long. I don't have time to talk about it now. But I want to deal with one of the controversies associated with this, which came up in the comments box. It came up in the comments section of either the Apollo Detectives video or one of the others. But someone brought up the subject of the point, and I actually think I mentioned this in the reply to comments video 20 I did just recently. Some people have said, well, the Percy and Bennett claimed that when they were designing the fake Apollo 13, they didn't think of something very, very significant. And that is the landing site for Apollo 13 was Fra Mauro. The Fra Mauro formation. Now, this is an area of the southwestern part of the near side of the moon, and it was visited actually by Apollo 14 on the next time. Named after a 15th century monk who was a map maker, which is interesting. I know in the they make a big deal of this in the video that goes with it. So what happened on the way to the moon? So that was where Apollo 13 was due to land and explore. Now, what's been said about this? What was said is that why would they land there? Because it was in darkness at the time. And this is very important because I'll just show you where Fra Mauro is. Just to let you know. Here's a picture of where Fra Mauro actually is on the moon. Can you see it? Little red dot there in the southwestern side is Fra Mauro. That's where they were going to land. Now, of course, as you hear again and again and again, the astronauts had no artificial lights. They didn't take any flash bulbs. They didn't take any floodlights. They didn't take anything to allow them to get those wonderful photographs. They were dependent on sunlight. The problem is, though, is what we've been told. At the time Apollo 13 was going to land there, Fra Mauro was in darkness. It was part of the lunar. It was at night time there. It was night time. And they never thought about that, did they? Well, it was obvious they weren't going to go there. It wasn't a real mission because they would never, ever have timed it so that when they landed, it was in darkness. Now, I had a lot of comments saying, no, it's not true, Ben. It's not true. They've lied to you. These Apollo hoax believers lied to you. Fra Mauro was in daylight when Apollo 13 was due to land there. That's the comment I got. So I thought this very simple thing to do to check it out. And I think I said this actually in the video I was going to do this, and so I'm going to do that now. So I went to this website here. This is a website called tutiempo.net Phases of the Moon. And I selected, and it's basically, it allows you to see what the phase of the moon is at any time you like. So I selected the phase of the moon, as you can see here, for April of 1970. And what happens is, right, April of 1970, and as you can see here in this picture, I've marked it with an asterisk. This was the period of time that Apollo 13 was actually in space on its way to the moon and on the way back. Basically from 13th... Well, basically, I'll give you the details again. It took off from April the 11th. That's on the page before. You see the page before. So that's April 11th. That's the top left. You see April 11th there. Where you see here we have a waxing crescent moon. See it? You have a waxing crescent moon there. That's when it took off. Now, 2 days into the mission, that is on the 13th of April, Apollo 13 on the 13th of April. Fancy that. That's quite incredible, isn't it? This 13 thing, maybe it is unlucky after all. That was when the explosion happened. And you can see it was a half moon. And indeed, this image of the image of Apollo, the image of the half moon with the bright red, with the bright spot of Fra Moreau marked, was on the cover of the first edition of Dark Moon, Apollo and the Whistleblowers. That's the edition I've got. So you can see that when that explosion happened, when the mission was on its way to the moon, you can see quite clearly that yes indeed he do, Fra Moreau was in darkness. It was night time, and if they'd landed there on April the 13th, they wouldn't have been able to see a damn thing. They wouldn't have been seeing their hand in front of their face because they got no artificial lights. Darkness is darkness on the moon, isn't it? So the question then remains: when was that? This is the big question. I mean, I think what the point that the detractors are trying to make is that yes, when the explosion happened on the 13th of April, Fra Moreau was in darkness, but when the mission was due to land, Fra Moreau was in daylight. Now you see here, of course, after the half moon, you get a gibbous moon, and slowly but surely, the shadow of the moon, the shadow of the shadow side of the moon gradually retracts on the near side. This is very, very important. It has to be timed precisely because remember that a day on the moon, so-called day, is the equivalent of 2 weeks on the Earth, because the moon in a single lunar month, that's I think 27.5 days or 28 days. So you're talking 14 days. And so if you're in darkness, you might have to wait as long as 14 days to come out into the daylight. So let's just have a look. Okay, so the question is, when was Apollo 13 due to land on the moon? And the answer that can be found by looking at its subsequent mission, Apollo 14, which was basically the 8th man mission. It was the one that came after that and actually went to the same place. This took off on the 31st of January 1971. So that's, well, you see, they had a little bit of a break, but not long, only a few months. And it landed on February the 9th. That's when it landed back again at the end of the mission, February the 9th. So between January the 31st and February the 9th, 1971, they had to walk on the moon for 2 days. Now this is what's known as the H missions, which are called targeted landings with 2-day stays on the moon. So you can kind of work it out. So you don't have to work it out. You have the details are always here. In fact, they spent 33.5 hours on the moon, and so they landed on February the 5th. They took off on January the 31st, landed on February the 5th. So that's basically it's a sort of 5 to 6.5 day mission, 5 to 5.5 day mission. Now you apply that to you apply that, presumably that the spacecraft went at the same speed because they were of similar design. Take off on April 11th for Apollo 13. So let's say 5 days mission, a 5-day mission, the 11th to the 12th, to the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. Well, I'd be generous, say 16th, okay? Supposing it was due to land on the 16th and spend 2 days there. Now, the thing about it is, land on the 16th. Now look at them. If you look at this picture, you can see that on the 16th there was a waxing gibbous moon. Now, supposing it was the 15th, you can see it's only just gone past half, basically. It's only 2 days since the half moon. But on the 16th, Fra Moreau, let's just double check the pictures. Fra Moreau it's actually almost bang on the Terminator, maybe just over. So the Apollo believers are right when they say that the Apollo 13 was not due to land on the moon when the moon was at half, making Fra Moreau on the dark side, the nighttime side. But they're wrong when they say that Apollo 13 was due to touch down in Fra Moreau in complete daylight. So what you're saying is, it's basically they were due to land either just before or just after the lunar dawn. Now, if you're going to land in the lunar dawn, the thing is, again, no artificial lights. You need the sunlight to see where you're going to land as well as anything else. You need to find a landing site by vision. you remember the trouble Apollo 11 had with that? Apparently they almost aborted, and they landed with just a few seconds of fuel to spare because the navigation computer took them to the wrong place. If that happened in darkness, you wouldn't have a chance. Now you might say, well, okay, it was the 16th and Fra Mauro is just over the Terminator. Right, so it's just lunar dawn. No problem. Plenty of sunlight for the Apollo 13 lunar module to come down and land. Would it? Let's have a look at just look at the Wikipedia page for Fra Mauro. The Fra Mauro Highlands are the landing site for the Apollo 14 mission. It talks about an 80-kilometer diameter crater formed of and the Fra Mauro Highlands are formed of ejecta and debris from the impact which caused the creation of the Mare Imbrium. Now that's what it means. What it means is basically that if you because it's highlands, because there's a lot of dramatic scenery, a hilly geographical area, to quote Wikipedia, you're going to have a lot of shadow. You're going to have had a lot of shade. Now, as you have been told, as indeed the Apollo believers admit, on the moon there's a contrast, a massive contrast between sunlight and shade, not just in temperature, but in lighting. Because there's no atmosphere to diffuse the light. There's the reflectivities of, despite what they say, you can see by the shadows on the lunar surface, there's not much reflectivity of natural surfaces at all, which means that it's possible that Apollo 13 would have a bit of a problem with the sun low on the horizon, even if it's just over the Terminator. It's the lunar dawn on the 16th, not the 15th. Apollo 13 would still have to come down in an area where this highlands, these mountains, these ejecta, was casting very long shadows, which would limit the choice of suitable landing sites. So I think the point that was made by Bennett and Percy is still valid, even though they were wrong about the actual day. They were correct in that lighting was a massive problem for Fra Mauro during the suspected landing of Apollo 13. So I think the Apollo believers are wrong to dismiss this. Completely wrong. And something else I want to add. This is something related to nothing that was in Steve's videos, but it's something related to the comments he made under the last videos about the pressure issue. That is the pressure of between the vacuum space and the pressure inside the craft, whether it's low Earth orbit, whether it's another location. So just a little addition to this video, which answers a few questions some people were asking and some of the comments that they made. So thanks very much. So that I think actually, even though I haven't managed to address every single point Steve makes in the video, I think is a suitable to rebuttal to what he said, and I think it is not. I think it shows distinctly that he has not proved his case. He's not proved his points at all. I think he's wrong to think that the moon landings were real, and the manner in which he chooses to conduct himself is not always very, very professional or very, very humane, and that's something that's going to put people off, basically. So he's not helping his cause when he calls people names and he talks about wood chippers and chefs and things like that. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't call me fat and bald and things like that, like everyone else does, like the trolls do. They said worse things as well. And obviously Steve is going to make a response video to this one, and obviously I'm going to get an absolute cascade of comments underneath this video saying, Ben, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that. Bob Branning may try to get back in under another account, or who the real person behind Bob Branning. I'll soon sniff him out if it's him. But the point of the matter is these dialogues are basically infinite. And they go on and on until one side or both sides just lose energy. And that's obviously going to happen in this case. But obviously that has not happened now. I'm going to make further reply videos to Steve Mumbling. It may be the next one I do. But if I do, it'll be on another subject, because I'm not going to say any more about the moon for a while. Okay, I think I just need a break from it, and I'll be covering other things. This is not a mission of defeat. That's simply me explaining why I think it needs... basically, I think I've done an adequate job for now on this one. So thank you everybody for watching Hapan Muti. Thanks to Marcus and Scott and Colin and all the people who've been dedicatedly working on this, along with other people including absent friends such as Bill Casing, Ralph Renee and others who have fought this fight for a very long time against ridicule and against demonisation. It goes on. And as I've said before, as I said to Marcus in the radio show I did with him, we are now at the 50th anniversary mark. If you go to the link in the description box, the last interview I did with Marcus was about Apollo 8, about the 50th anniversary of Apollo 8. Now, Apollo 8 at the time, when it happened in 1968 in December, was basically, supposedly, man's first mission to the moon. And when they went into orbit around the moon. They didn't land, but they went into orbit and they came back. There's a lot. Now that one is often actually forgotten. Apollo 8. Apollo 8 is very often forgotten because, of course, in July '69, with Apollo 11 landing on the moon, Apollo 8 was basically upstaged. But Marcus and I marked it, and what's more, we're going to make other radio shows about this. No doubt there'll be other videos too. And there's even talk about us doing a debate with an Apollo believer, not Steve, someone else. The 50th anniversary, we are now within this period of the 50th anniversary of Apollo. There'll be the next anniversary is July this year, which will be the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, which will be much more a media event than December was with Apollo 8. There's going to be a lot of stuff on TV about this. And that's an opportunity. It's what is known as an informational choke point. Because there's going to have to be a lot of disinformation as well. And we've even seen some of this, which Marcus and I discuss in the film. And in order to counter that, we have to do it in the way we're doing now, by making these videos and making these radio shows, which is what we're going to do. Because at informational choke points, the truth bursts at the seams, and sometimes it can come right out. So expect disinformation, because you're going to get it. There's going to be a lot of disinformation coming up about the moon landings. The official story is going to be pressed and pushed, and there's going to be a lot of lies told about the other side. It's going to happen, and rest assured, Marcus, Scott, Colin, Neil and everyone else, and Andy, we're going to be there to provide the antidote to all that. I can absolutely assure you of that. So watch this space, watch this channel, read Nexus magazine, it's all going to be in there. And so we'll be hearing from you on this subject again very soon. This is the last moon video I'm going to make for a while, but by no means is it going to be the last one I make ever. And that includes anything that Steve Mumbling might say. So thanks very much. Despite everything, thank you, Steve Mumbling, for giving grist to my mill, and thanks very much indeed to everyone who watches and supports and comments on this particular video and on all the others. I'll be back soon. Hospital Port as Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.